And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. What a fantastic crowd we have out there and the ideas from already tonight. Of course, tonight I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, all I want is the truth. Just give me some truth, John Lennon said. But it seems like it's tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. And that is Dan Farah, Elizondo, and CIA guys. This is very interesting. The big old age of disclosure, blockbuster, bloated budget documentary is coming out on November 21st. And they've already started with the heaps of putting it out there and getting the PR machine going for this piece of real narrative control propaganda. And tonight, we're going to expose the entire project from who's involved with it, what's it about, and the very highest levels involved, all the way up to Steven Spielberg on the Hollywood side and all the way up to James Clapper on the Intel side. This seesaw of influences and influencing the public around the UFO file, going deep, deep tonight in X series episode 207. This is the X-Protect UFO file revealed, age of disclosure exposed. Now, X-Protect is the group that I've put in the center of the UFO secrecy and also massaging the various themes that come out about the UFO file, including, oh, we never had it, that stuff doesn't exist, all the way up to, oh, it's out there and it's a big threat. It's the same group, and they've been embedded in the government for a long, long time, maybe longer than people could possibly imagine. And I've really tried to highlight them and show their footprints through history, just as, I learned great things from great researchers like Professor Scott, Jim Mars, Stanton Friedman, and others. One of the things that Professor Scott, political research, taught me was the group that's involved in the deep state, which was the term that he coined, gets all of this power from staying in that stealth system and then rocketing into the public with a deep event and retreating, getting a policy change, and we all look around at the various debris, including all the way back to World War II or the Great Depression and the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, and on we go, Watergate, 9/11. There's a thread with this group, and that group operates under extreme secrecy. We're going to get into it tonight, and we're going to get into it through the lens of the Age of Disclosure documentary, which the CIA is hedging its UFO bets that it can rescue the UFO threat narrative, which has been close to demolished in a number of ways by the bad actors that they've put forward, including Elizondo, who narrates this piece of intel junk. I'm also going to get into your questions tonight in the second half of the program, and we'll go to about 2 hours with you here tonight, and we're on the heels of some really great interviews. Last week, of course, the Antarctica whistleblower, Mr. Eric Hecker.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. What a fantastic job he did exposing the neutrino effect and its relationship to the UFO file, including the really heavy duty revelation that he dropped in the middle of that interview, which was all about how they were using the neutrinos as a way to balance the UFO file to track, because the neutrinos on some level are emitted by the UFOs. And this whole tracking of the UFO file, he came up with the term that it was like air traffic control there in Antarctica. And that explains so much about what we've been trying to put forward about Antarctica and the heart of that secrecy, all the way back to Lloyd Berkner and Admiral Byrd and Operation High Jump. And of course, physicist Berkner, deeply involved in the UFO file, deeply involved in the moon landing, and the man who President Kennedy was on his way to meet. I did a whole documentary about it. But these pieces, you see, when they start to come together and really shape that tapestry that we can take a real look at, this is quite remarkable. So that's all there in the Eric Hecker interview. The one we did before that was very interesting, which was I was speaking to a relative of Elvis Presley, and it was his cousin, Donna Presley, and she told me all the heavy-duty story about how Vernon, his father, had done a secret investigation, a secret autopsy, and all these other things, and come to the conclusion that the colonel, had been involved in this uh, whole thing about taking Elvis out, and that whole thing was a big, huge dust up in the background, and we never got to the bottom of it. There were rumors swirling around about this for years. And I will say it came up in a very unusual way. And whenever you get around that music machine, you can find the fingerprints of intel as we found it in the various assassinations that have taken place, some of the overdoses that were meant to look like assassinations, some of the mind control programs, sometimes when you see the way they portray Britney Spears and things like that to keep control of that catalog, it's quite remarkable. And, there was a researcher out there who was around in the 70s and 80s, and her approach on this was very interesting. Instead of now, what we have is there's an awful lot of sort of hatred and envy towards the actual puppet, themselves, the celebrities. She flipped it around. She saw the celebrities very often as victims of that machine, and the machine would move forward and do what they wanted with it. Whether the characters back then were like, people like John Belushi and things like that. And that's a very interesting way. I think we get a better picture of it because right now you have so many different types of celebrity bashing things that are going on, and God knows they deserve it. But if you can see through some of that sometimes to the way that these people are manipulated, it'll give us some better idea of what's happening there. And I think there's a greater awareness about when people get taken out on that level. Well, the reason to remove people in various, whether we saw this whole wave of holistic doctors being wiped out a few years ago. There was a whole wave of throwing these different investors out the window. There are programs at different times in different industries for deleting databases, deleting knowledge, and taking out their enemies and things like that. It's very interesting because in tonight's show, I focus very heavily on X-Protect. And X-Protect, you're going to have to look at it as a group that we've been able to identify, and their fingerprints all through these various decades. A classic case, of course, is Morris Jessup, who came so close to opening up the UFO file in the late 1950s. And The Secret to Anti-Gravity, the whole piece was there with Jessup, who had really lived 9 lives before then. And I'm very fond of how they, mentioning how they do these various names, but over and over again, you're going to find in that deep state setup, when they get around some of these very mystical aspects, you're always going to find this Ketchum Jessup interaction. Somehow the names seem to show up over and over again whenever you get around, for example, Edgar Casey, when you get around the UFO file, when you get around Atlantis research, you're going to find those numbers and names in the heart of all this. The question is why? And these are some of the mysteries that we see in the heart of all this. Now, I like to say all the events that we have going on also serve two purposes. One of the purposes that we see going on is the general news and the general push for control of the political system. There's a secondary communication that's going on also, though, and that's the steganography that we penetrate into in this show. That's why we call it X-steganography. And the heart of that, of course, is SpaceX and X CEO, Elon Musk. And I would say that Musk has been doing some very unusual steganography, and it's all about the moon. And there's a real battle about space going on between the Trump administration, the Musk forces, and the secret space program. And this all gets us deep into what's happening with the release of this documentary. We're going to go into that tonight. And as I said, in the second part of the show, we're going to take your questions. I want to remind you also, if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That is a free newsletter, and it keeps us in touch through the massive censorship that we see on these social media platforms. Nonetheless, for free, you can stay in touch and know about the incredible, and I mean incredible, shows that we have coming up for you, including fascinating interviews, X-series episodes that will blow your mind, documentaries, of course, our mini-series, that we've had going on, DocuSeries, Pyramid X, and The Craze and the Hot Zone, all the Atlantis research. It's all there in that newsletter. So stand up and be counted. Go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for that newsletter. Before I go any further, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
CC says CIA is always lies, and Sarah Hansen says there's nothing sweet about them. Karen Carpenter says crazy times need to be where the higher-minded folks hang out.
Oh, yeah.
In the ideas room.
There's no question about it. I mean, it's amazing because I love interviews, but there's nothing better than doing an X show live with you here. So that's one of my favorite things of all time. Let me do this. Let me get into the Musk moon madness, and then that'll be a good prelude to everything else. Unless you got something else.
Nope, okay, we're
good. Okay. NASA eyes other options for moon landings as Musk's SpaceX falls behind. NASA previously planned to use SpaceX next generation Starship rocket system, which is in development, to land on the lunar surface. They've changed their mind. Now, Sean Duffy and Musk have had this weird back and forth going on for a long time where Musk is like, oh, you need at least 3 points for an IQ or whatever. And over and over again, we have this theme. Now, Musk wanted to get his guy, who was actually a hardcore Democrat, Jared Isaacman, young guy too young for the job. He wanted him to be the leader of NASA. But Trump probably played along and was like, yeah, get me elected and we'll do it. And then pulled the rug on the whole thing. It was like, no, I'm going to have my guy Duffy for now. So we've had this back and forth going on with the two of them. Now, a rumor came out in the middle of that tussle about Artemis 3 going back to the moon. Now it's 2027. Okay. You remember very clearly it was 2022, 2023, 2024, this year, next year. Now it's 2027. By the way, the whole thing was originally promised by Dan Quayle. If you go back in history and look up Vice President Dan Quayle, look for a little statement by him right around 1990, where he said, we're going to the moon and we're going to Mars right after that. They had a whole program for it. This comports with what I found when I looked into the history, especially dealing with astronaut Gordon Cooper. And he's such a key figure in what he left behind in his autobiography about the moon and the Mars missions, which he was in the heart of planning. He could give us those details. And he said the Mars mission was set in 1966 and then again in 1981. And it was 1 year. So you'd leave in 1980 and you'd get there a year later. This is the way that he was looking at it. And he was also supposed to lead that mission. So when we look at all this stuff about, hey, we're going to Mars, we're doing this whole bit, we're getting a lot of strange flack about this because it's probably a 40 to 45-year-old conversation. And if they thought they were going to Mars in 1966 and then again in 81, what happened to that mission? Obviously, something took place. And I believe that they went, and that's part of the problem here. So Musk gets a little sand kicked in his face by Duffy saying, well, we're not going to use SpaceX for this moon landing. And they're pretending like they're going to the moon for the first time. Or are they? Becomes the question. Trump government planning to eliminate NASA? Truth behind viral claim as Musk issues strong warning. Elon Musk slammed acting NASA administrator and transport secretary Sean Duffy amid claims that the Trump government was planning to get rid of NASA. Now, this got floated out. I think it was Musk who floated the rumor out. And of course, getting rid of NASA is practically impossible. They are the largest repository of UFO photos, videos, artifacts, you name it. And secondarily, SpaceX, though, would be the next one up. And so we get this very weird dichotomy between the two where NASA will actually talk about the possibility of UFOs. Suddenly they're gung-ho to talk about it. And Musk is still like, oh no, they don't exist. There's no such thing. I've never seen it. So he's just under orders from DARPA to do that, which shows you that even with trillions of dollars, or billions leading to trillions, you're still not your own man. It's tricky. It's a tricky environment because you can't operate out there without the Space Force. So these were the weird headlines and things going on. And then Musk decided to fire off at Duffy again in some unusual ways. And he says, they won't, meaning they won't make it to Mars without us. SpaceX is moving like lightning compared to the rest of the space industry. Moreover, Starship will end up doing the whole moon mission. Mark my words. All right, you're talking to a government official who controls the mission, and you're saying, mark my words. What does that mean? If you don't do it, I'll destroy your ships. I mean, it's pretty crazy. NASA's acting administrator, Sean Duffy, announced this week that in its quest to return astronauts to the moon and to do so before China puts its boot prints there, the agency is open to using moon landers from competitors to SpaceX. The announcement provoked the ire of Elon Musk. It's not hard to do. Musk, the founder and CEO of SpaceX, took aim at Duffy in a flurry of social media posts. And he said, quote, Sean Dummy is trying to kill NASA. The language, again. Musk also wrote, well, yeah, that's not very important. NASA's plan had been to use SpaceX's next-generation Starship rocket system, which is in development on land on the lunar surface, but Musk's rocket company has fallen behind schedule. So something is going on there. Now, about 85% of all launches into space are being done by SpaceX, which is actually DARPA, right? DARPA through the hands of a private institution. So they're getting that edge going in a major way. But that dust-up, I think, reveals a great deal about the acceleration of time in the background, which is why we see this gasping again to try to revive the UFO threat narrative through the CIA groups. That's why you're seeing people like Elizondo show up in the middle of all this. Elizondo completely discredited, but a Hollywood film dedicated to him and his story, and then, you know, as a documentary, and then another Hollywood film, which is, you know, you get some major actor to play him and all the rest, and we get our friend Spielberg to direct it. That could resuscitate the entire thing and bring it on. So they've been trying to do this. They've had tremendous difficulties, including in Congress, and on the side of trying to get to the truth. As I've pointed out, the incredible opportunity that was there for the task force that Luna was running completely dissipated under her leadership with stumbling, bumbling Birches. Now, what I would say is they probably both did want to get somewhere with this, but you know, they wasted 6 months. Now at the task force, there's a month left, I think. You know, they might be able to do one more hearing or something like that. And unfortunately, what they did with that task force is they turned it into a promotional vehicle for Luna, who now goes on podcasts, you know, pretending to know this stuff. And she's this is somebody who wants to know things, but she's pretty ill-informed, and so she can't really bring it across with these hearings. Now, I think that process should have been much more open to independent media, who does have a basis of fact on this. And unfortunately, what you had was, you know, a bunch of counterintelligence people running the thing, and then finally, you know, people were saying, well, this is all so intel oriented. What can you do and get it outside the purview of the IC? So she started to pretend that she was, you know, getting tough with everybody and like, I'm going to subpoena this person and all that. Nothing happened, you know. So the task force, the D-class task force and all that, dedicated to transparency, the big failure on the Kennedy assassination, you know, they went into this whole thing about the 1963 records. Oh, she got these special records from Russia that are from 1963. They're all the same records that, you know, were out in a documentary by who was James Bond in Moonraker, all that.
Roger Moore.
Roger Moore, yeah. So Roger Moore did in 1999. He did a whole special about those records. They were already out, you know. So this throwback to the 90s thing, it's like, because I don't know if they think maybe that nobody has any memory of that stuff. They just they try to do this huge push, and they were like, oh, secret document that George Knapp got reveals creation itself and how humanoids got made, you know. And it comes literally out of ISIS Unveiled, which is Helena Blavatsky's book, You didn't need to smuggle that out of Russia. It's everywhere. So there's a lot of weird things and hoaxes associated with documents and creating these kind of viral memes for things. And then you have people repeating them on these pop click podcasts. It's really, I mean, it's gotten to such a point where, I listen to the stuff and I'm like, they're terribly ill informed. So either that's intentional or, they just want the field to be that way. There's such a demand in the podcast land because there are all these companies motivating in the background. And I want to mention this because I've tried to point it out so that people understand that there's, the thing that's called independent media and all that is just now a second paid version of the media that was the corporate media. Everyone realized and was looking through that and like, Anderson Cooper is just getting pharma money. Like, why should I listen to that? You still get a lot of Democrats listening to it. But all that stuff, MSNBC and all the rest of it. But the independent media was supposed to be the solution for that. And there were moves early on, including this show, to be a big push against that mainstream media wall. What you got instead were the same people who got kind of booted out of that system. The networks kind of retrenched and they put everybody into this podcast space. And what they did is they just poached the subject matter from the people who were doing the real research. So now you're getting this very, very superficial souffle of nonsense dealing with, when they get into the UFO file, they don't understand it. They think that CIA people are going to give them disclosure, things of this nature. And they bastardize a number of things, which is why you see themes from the 90s and things come up and they're like, oh, wow, what a major discovery, So this is the nature of the thing because the expertise level is so low when you get into this, because the really deep UFO research and the really deep research around esoteric matters, the deep research around exotic technology and X-Protect and things of this nature, you have to go deep. You cannot run it as a fluff podcast. It doesn't work that way. And so, you have these people ripping off the themes and doing the fluff thing, but it has no substance. And people, I think, are starting to see through it. But unfortunately, there are tremendous, tremendous dollars behind this. Now, in the Wall Street Journal, and you have to say this for the Wall Street Journal, they're always going to get to the numbers. And they got a whole profile of Sean Ryan going, who does this, podcast. And, it seems like when he's interviewing veterans, which is what he started off doing, he's in his comfort zone. But what they did, it's very interesting. The company he got involved with, Daystar, is they said, well, you have to include things like UFOs and stuff like that. And so you have this show with this guy who doesn't know very much about that topic. But he has to do it because of the money that's involved. So they were asking him, how much money are you making? And he's like, well, I'm doing like $1 million for this, but I'm going to do with this new company, Daystar, $10 million, and everybody's going dollar crazy in this space. And I noticed this before and I pointed it out, and not as a way to be hostile to the people involved, but to say that this is not what independent media is about. You should be able to make great money from doing great work. But it can't be the crux. It can't be the ideal. The ideal should be to get the information out that's being blocked. That's the whole point. And if you get rich doing it, fantastic, more power to you. But if you're doing it in this superficial way that is misleading people and being a tool of various marketing and intel interests, then it's a very, very big problem. That's how the mainstream media got into trouble. And, they've been able to destroy elections, misrepresent things, cause wars, get us on the brink of civil war, and all the rest of it. So the whole point behind dark journalism is to get to the heart of the potent issues, the real thing, the real truth, to give that to you and to say, it's up to you, right? Can you handle the truth? But more often than not, I think that's what people want, is the real thing. And I think in the case of this situation with Age of Disclosures, you're going to find out tonight that even one lone outpost doing this is going to make all the difference. And it will shatter the op if enough people listen. That ripple that goes out from the ideas room, make no mistake, it ripples out there and it reaches into every area of the highest output of any media, podcast media, mainstream media, whatever it happens to be. So make no mistake that is in place. I wanted to point out a couple of examples of this that I would say are just kind of gauche. Now, PBD, this guy does a podcast, and the valuetainment thing. He has all these big guests and all the rest of it. But apparently this guy is good at making pyramid schemes and things. And what he's been touting lately is this company that puts all these influencers out there, like Candace Owens and other people off the reservation, and PPD, and they will have them come out and they'll say, look, for $48,000, you get 30 minutes. Book now. Click now. And that's what these people have been doing with that opportunity of moving and creating a new media. Is they're sitting there and figuring out, how can I get that pop click button, book now, 48 grand for 30 minutes. Now think about PPD. Is he worth 48 grand for 30 minutes? I don't think so. But if somebody's willing to pay it, that's their problem. My point is, this entire media world should not be used as a circus for these carpetbaggers around these topics where they don't know a damn thing about what they're talking about. That's my main problem with them. They're not very well studied. And, it's funny because this mania has been taking over. So, Tim Cass does this whole show and he's been on doing this thing. I never watched that stuff, but he did a whole thing and he said, Timcast Media now valued at $800 million. No, it's not. It's not valued at $800 million. Come on. But the point is that this is the thrust of what they want to do. They don't want to be known for, bringing home the real information. They want to be known for how much money they can push out there with it. So,
everybody just wants to cash in.
It is. It's
sell out.
Yeah. And this is the funny thing. You should, as I said, there's nothing wrong with making a good living from delivering on your work, but this can't be the root of what you do with an independent media. It's a disgrace. It really is. That's how you lose the media. And that's how, those people should just go to Wall Street if they're so obsessed with money and do it that way. What you need to be obsessed with is delivering the facts regardless of where they lead. That's the crucial thing. And you shouldn't lead people over the edge either, to, pump up your own station and to, basically manipulate the narrative. There's so much manipulation of the narrative as it is. And with AI, it's going to be the echo of the manipulation of the narrative. That's why the failure of Age of Disclosure is crucial. And I mean this from the independent media side. If there's anything left of an independent media, and I'm doubtful, there may not be. This may be the lone outpost, along with Gigi Young and Joseph Farrell and others. But I think what you're looking at here is a crucial moment. This is going to separate, the people who know what they're talking about from the people who want to be spoon-fed the intel narratives based on a marketing program. I'm going to show you the people behind the crafting of this narrative tonight and the director that's involved, his close association with Hollywood, including being Steven Spielberg's producer, including being Lue Elizondo's agent, including being the agent for Jay Stratton from Radiance Technologies, who just got a best-selling book and all this stuff. These things are coldly calculated now. And what they're doing is they're poaching the subjects that have been brought forward over decades by independent researchers. And they're doing this very superficial version that serves the intel community. And they serve it up and they use the terms. They know what marketing terms to use to make it look like the stuff, but it's not the stuff. And this is what we're going to get into tonight as we move along deep tonight into X Series 207. This is the X-Protect UFO file revealed. We're revealing it tonight through the lens of the CIA documentary Age of Disclosure, which we're going to expose tonight. And before I go any further, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Free Wheezy says, clearly this is the lone outpost.
Yeah.
And Claire says, Dark Journalist and friends are the only media left worth engaging with.
Wow, that's incredible. I want it to be a vibrant community of people sharing ideas. That's the whole idea of doing independent media. Is there's so many things to bring forward that are exciting, whether it's dealing with the ancient world, whether it's dealing with esoteric subjects, the UFO file, deep politics. There's so much for us to bring forward that this thing that's going on, which serves personalities and agencies and things, does not live up to any of that. And I have to stand in stark contrast to it. And I think the way that you can do it, when you listen to things, all you have to think is this potent information? Or is this kind of rehashed diatribe with people kind of hanging out just on the headline of the thing? And most of the podcast stuff is just hanging out on the headline. All right, we're going to go to the Jersey Shore. Weekends on the Jersey Shore. There's something about New Jersey. I know some incredible places in New Jersey, and I love the people in New Jersey. There was last November and December of 2024 an incredible raid of drones throughout the area of New Jersey, all the way over to New York City. This was a phenomenal push, and it was where the stress test with the independent media failed because they didn't know what to make of it. So what they said was, people are just hallucinating, which is exactly the stupid kind of thing that the corporate media would say. I also think that the independent media failed the stress test with the Charlie Kirk assassination as well. It's not the way to get to the bottom of things with that. I'll save that for another day. Steven Spielberg's new UFO film brings Hollywood to the Jersey Shore. These are the stories that were coming out after that buzz. But again, they were shooting it in New Jersey, right in the heart of these sightings. Matter of fact, part of the Netflix studios that they cleared out in order to shoot this movie there were directly underneath where some of these sightings were. Part of the Jersey Shore will serve as the set for a new Steven Spielberg UFO movie. Filming starts this week in Cape May County, in towns like Tuckahoe. Keep this in mind. Spielberg, New Jersey. Drones, New Jersey. Now, one of the people who produced our friend Spielberg in 2018 was a young, not so well-known producer named Dan Farah, who apparently had come into incredible influence and money rather quickly, if you check through his history. It's not very clear how. Interestingly enough, our friend Dan Farah is from New Jersey, and he went to school in New York. He went out to Los Angeles, production stuff. There wasn't much there. Then, producing Steven Spielberg. Now, Dan Farah, producer on Ready Player One, which was the Spielberg feature in 2018, is producing a new UFO documentary and adopting Tom DeLonge's Secret Machines novels into a TV series. Now, DeLonge was put forward in TTSA. That was a whole intel arrangement. The intelligence community set up the whole thing. I've gone through a number of shows outlining that, and people picked it up and understood it, but they took too long to understand it. And what happened was those people got away with all kinds of things. TV shows, they were run through the media, and the whole UFO field became populated by that thing. And it only started to really crumble and come apart over the past couple of years. Well, that was too long. So they should have, had they been on the same timeline with me on this, we would be looking at a very different situation and a very different field arrangement. So he's the guy who bought up the rights to Tom DeLonge's phony TTSA, Secret Machines and all that stuff, and now making the series for HBO. Now, this is the same guy who became Lue Elizondo's agent. Got him the book deal. Imminent, right? Imminent BS, as I call it. Terrible book. One of the worst books I think ever written by anyone ever. Including great things like, I felt it was my dream, and my dream was to defend the world. Yeah,
Did he really?
Great lines like that.
Wow.
All this better stuff. I mean, I should probably do dramatic readings from that book. Now, this guy obviously is the interface between the CIA intel world pumping the UFO threat narrative, making it through Congress, making it a thing, and then him cleaning up with the book rights and making them into movies and shoveling them over to his friend Steven Spielberg to make Hollywood feature films with, so that the whole thing works like one big system, which is the CIA is famous for doing that. They've done it on a number of different topics. But when they want to spin a topic a particular way, just like when they did the propaganda movies in the 80s, and some of them were good too, but they were all about fighting the Russians and things like that. Now, so the CIA is classic for this. Somewhere along the way, the people studying on the independent media side forgot that the CIA were the manipulative bad guys. And they thought, hey, that guy's in the CIA. He can tell me about the UFO file. This is the nature of the problem. And we've been trying to kind of reverse engineer that problematic process for a long time on this show. It's funny when I think about what we brought forward, because we called out the situation, 2019 back there, and have been calling it out ever since. Now, there was a big disclosure panel where Colonel Carl Nell, who was one of the guys who was right behind all these people, I'm in there with Mellon, I'm in there with Elizondo. He said, well, given what's happened over the past, say 18 months, I'm not really behind those guys anymore. And I think this version of disclosure is dead, and we need to find another way to do this. And it was interesting because Richard Dillon was in there on this panel, and he was like, yeah, that's true. I think it has failed. And I think that OSAP was mostly a program to transfer money to Bigelow Enterprises. Look, this is what we put forward when the whole thing came out. And people like Dolan said, oh, you have to be mentally deranged to not take the wind of these guys in disclosure. So it took them 6 years to figure out what we put forward right here. So this is what I mean about being potent with the whole thing, and these people playing influences and playing favorites. Well, when you get Carl Nell, who's one of the central people in setting the thing up, it might as well be Elizondo himself coming forward and saying, I'm full of it, So on one hand, you have this group over here saying, we've had enough of Lue failing to put forward our UFO threat. And then on the other side, there is the push that was like, well, we already put all this money into it. We put all this stuff into it. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to rifle through this documentary. And, the documentary was already shot and everything else, and included people like Marco Rubio and stuff before he was Secretary of State. And they're hinging everything on this. And then the Spielberg movie, there's no way to reverse engineer that or get out of that, So what are you going to do there? You need to stick. You need to double down with it. That's what this faction is doing. And it's very interesting the way it works. HarperCollins acquires the rights to bombshell memoir from Jay Stratton, former director of U.S. government's UAP task force. Look, it was Farah, again, who got him the deal. Farah represents Stratton. What does Stratton represent? He's the CEO of Radiance Technologies. What do they claim to have? They claim to have the potential for reverse engineering UAP as part of their technology. And he claims, I've been involved with this for years and years. And there's Farah, again, giving us his book deal. I have another headline on that I want to show. It's another UFO boss to break silence in major book deal. UFO boss? Is that a new slogan I'm unaware of? Jay Stratton's memoir promises to reveal shocking discoveries, challenges, and breakthroughs. But yeah. One of your guys said something to another guy who told you this. Yeah, that's shocking. What a shocking discovery. And, Luna will have you on a panel, and you'll sit down and you'll talk about it, and she won't know what questions to ask. And then, so on we roll. So this is what happened. According to the Stratton's bio, it was while serving as the chief of the airspace warfare at the DIA that Stratton and his colleagues learned about the existence of UAP. You mean UFOs? And the related national security concerns in response. They created the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Program, OSAP, the first U.S. program to investigate UAP since the closure of Blue Book. No way. All right. They've been investigating this stuff all along. It's a joke. Among Stratton's hand-picked team members was whistleblower David Grush. Now, this is interesting because Grush was a pivotal figure because they did the 2023 hearings with him. The problem was Mellon and Elizondo orchestrated it. And we've put that forward many, many times on this program and how they did it. So what I want to show is this guy, Farah, who's also representing Grush, is consolidating all of these whistleblowers. Now it's like the whistleblower club, and they're all going to Hollywood, baby. And they're all getting the big money, and they're all putting the books out because this guy is the ringleader of this whole thing. But there's a venture firm behind this guy, just like earlier when I mentioned this about Sean Ryan, and he said Daystar Media wants to do all this stuff with me, $10 million. Daystar Media, if you track them behind the scenes, what is Daystar Media? They're run by a venture capitalist company. So it's just venture capital coming in and saying, here's what we're doing, and by the way, you have a great food show or whatever your expertise is, but we're going to put you out there with a big podcast, but you have to run UFOs and this version of UFOs through your show. That's why you're getting this really superficial treatment of a very deep, important subject. But I want to emphasize to you, as somebody who's very familiar with how money works in the background, the amount of money being poured into the space to bring on the UFO threat would boggle your mind. So keep that in mind when you're dealing with this. And we're going to get to the root of it tonight. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 207, the X Protect UFO file revealed, age of disclosure exposed. That's what we're doing here tonight. We're going to be taking your questions, let's say in about 20 minutes or so. In the meantime, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Andy B says the whole Luna task force was planned to be junk conspiracy, DJ. And Ray Story says, is Luna clueless or just compromised?
Well, my experience with Luna, my impressions there, I should say, is no, I think that something's going on there where they're planning the Luna show. The Luna podcast is the thing that's coming up, and that the congressional part seems to be just a vehicle for that. That's what I'm getting. So
she's using politics to become a celebrity.
Yes.
It's very simple.
Yeah.
And it used to be the other way around, where celebrities would get into politics because that's where the power is. But now it's all about celebrity. So it's so obvious that, and is she really, what's her intention? Is her intention to get to the truth, to UFO truth? I mean, if she gets some truth out, I'm sure she'd be pleased. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's not her driving force behind her intention.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Look, I was completely open to the Luna committees getting to the bottom of the truth, and I gave them a lot of information, and I sent them information in the background. Whether they spent the time with it or not, who knows? But certainly, when she went on Rogan's show and she was talking about certain things, she was using the exact phrases from the show. So I'm very sure that she's familiar with it. She spends time around independent media. Good for her. The thing is, fundamentally, the JFK hearings were a joke because they didn't go anywhere. They didn't get to the heart of things. The biggest thing you got was Oliver Stone, who did a fantastic movie, getting to the heart of it. But the hearings didn't go any further than that. So that's a big problem. And I think you relied too much, Luna, if you're listening, on Jefferson Morley, who is not much of a firebrand when it comes to this type of research. He's written some good books, but it's, you need a real movement of force in there. And also the whole idea was you want to be able to take the UFO file and the JFK assassination issue and bring them together. That's the crux of it. When I talk about X Protect, the most high profile victim of that group is President Kennedy. There's no question from the research we brought forward that this is the case. The nature of that technology and the aerospace role in it has been hidden, and they've had you chasing your tails in history with the mafia and things like that, which don't level up to the events that have taken place historically. And there's a track and a trail, and we're going to go through some of those victims tonight, high and low, not as a way to sensationalize the topics, but to show the real consequences for people who made it with new discoveries, and some of those people you may be familiar with. James McDonald, of course, a very important UFO researcher who'd made dramatic breakthroughs and, was disposed of by this group under the whole suicided, thing, which they've been using that since the 1950s. So, there are a number of examples, of course, and I've crisscrossed with those examples in my own life and my own research, and people like Mark McCandlish, who brought forward all of this information about the flux liner that nobody knew anything about. And he was at our secret space conferences back in the day. So we're going to cover some of that before we close out tonight, because you have to know the footprints of that group to understand the relationship. Now, I want to say that when you get around the Central Intelligence Agency, you have to be aware that the thing that they're good at is assassination. That's their forte. Propaganda, counterintelligence, narrative manipulation, those are all Central Intelligence works. And so you have to realize when you get around the UFO file, even though it was hidden for many, many years, there's a whole program around how to hide it. And at a certain point, they bring forward people who, need to be discredited because they're getting close to the truth. And there are levels of what you do with those people. But if somebody is very high profile, like a president, for example, bringing forward information like that, then they become a national security threat to these people. So understanding how that group works has been a major theme in the shows that we do, and I think people appreciate it. But the depth of it, I could do so many shows on it because of the things you discover. So tonight we're going to go a little further with this. That's why the CIA is very dangerous to have around the UFO file as the leading authority figure, and why you can't trust counterintelligence people with disclosure, because that's a very important concept for all of humanity. And these people have a very dedicated purpose of controlling how you think. So, let's get real on this. You're not going to get the truth from counterintelligence people. They're the best trained liars on the planet. That's the fact. And I've talked to them at length, and they've told me, you're absolutely right. They don't expect the truth from these people. So why should we? I want to put us on the same footing. I think that's a crucial thing for the public to have. So Dan Farah, Tom DeLonge books. Dan Farah, Jay Stratton books. Dan Farah, Lue Elizondo books. He covers them all. He reps them all. David Grush, he reps him. Dan Farah, who are you? How are you repping all these people? How are you producing Steven Spielberg? How are you putting out Age of Disclosure? And you're incorporating directly with the Central Intelligence Agency for the feature. What is going on here? And is anyone asking this guy? I keep hearing them say, filmmaker, and all this stuff. Like, who are we talking about here? Nobody's asking the right questions. This is the problem when we get in here. All right, let's take a look at this. Now, this is a pre-screening of the Age of Disclosure. I'm sorry James Clapper couldn't be there because he hogs a lot of time in the actual movie. The movie's narrated by Lue Elizondo, who also is not in that picture. And it features Elizondo, who, in case you haven't been watching, is a counterintelligence agent who claimed that he ran a UFO program. And, in fact, as we went more and more into his background, he was one of the chief interrogators for Iraq and Afghanistan and places like that. And an unusual choice, shall we say, but somebody who they could trust on the inside, who they rolled out there with this phony story about him being a disgruntled whistleblower who was just mad at that government. And, he had to bring the truth out. And then when I did just a little bit of research into him back in the day, I found out that he was working for no fewer than 5 different government agencies. He hadn't quit the government at all. And finally, they nailed him on it a couple of years after everybody gave him this floating, access into the space and bought his story. And this is a guy who operated with very deep people. There's no question about it. But the idea that he was trying to bring disclosure, that was the thing that was deceptive. And it's really interesting because finally The Intercept caught up with him and said, well, do you still work for the government? That was the question that should have been asked up front. And he said, well, I'd rather not get into it. And they said, well, it's kind of important. And he said, well, yeah, I do, but it's not what you think. What? We think that you're a counterintelligence agent. What's changed? So the reason that those people couldn't come on this show, and why Chris Mellon made sure to that, as David Grush told me, and that became a whole thing with Mellon freaking out and trying to freak out John Warner and all that. His cousin, who had called out the whole UFO threat thing. And I spoke to John recently, by the way. He is going to come back on the show. He's finishing his 4th book and recovering from various things he's been doing. But we're going to see him. We're going to see him back. One of the most important things that he did, and of course, he's the son of Catherine Mellon, who was the heiress to the Mellon banking fortune. But he called out DOD billionaire Chris Mellon, his cousin, for promoting this UFO threat and pulling the strings behind the scenes. And one of the stunning things in the middle of all this, of course, was David Grush telling me in our phone call, I can't associate with you or go on your show. Chris Mellon won't let me. So that's what disclosure is. It is the control of DOD billionaires over whistleblowers. And now they have Farah rounding up these whistleblowers to run them through these Hollywood and book deals. Don't rock the boat. Don't upset the Mellon UFO threat show. That's not anything to do with disclosure. There's nothing to do with learning about UFOs. Think about someone with integrity like Stanton Friedman or Jim Mars. These are people I knew and talked to starting the show. The defense minister of Canada, who told me very clearly how the UFO file worked between governments. You just don't talk to the presidents. It's the 2 different militaries to deal with it. These people had integrity and try to bring forward something that was important. These people are counterintelligence people promoting a narrative for a sky event, a threat, UFO threat that they can build into a boondoggle and finally snap into emergency powers. That's what it's for. That's what it's being built for. And it's moving very, very rapidly. So this picture we see here, I'm going to point out some of the people. So that's Jim Semivan, 25-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency, CEO, COO of TTSA. He started it. That's Farah right there. He's the strange figure who's gobbling up all of the book deals for the whistleblowers, getting the movie deals and all that stuff. And that's Hal Puthoff, who's worked with the CIA on these projects since the late 60s. Over there is Gary Nolan, who you're familiar with in this field. He does all the CIA brain scan stuff around the UFO file. He works for the Central Intelligence Agency and is a close friend of Dr. Anthony Fauci. Put that forward before people said, oh, I couldn't believe it. And then I show them the social media postings where he talks about his friendship with Fauci and how he admires him and all this other stuff. And then those people just go quiet. I never hear from them again. So that's who you're dealing with. So you're getting Anthony Fauci, CIA disclosure around these people. That's who they are. There's also Admiral Gallaudet, Tim Gallaudet in there. And, my only thing about him is I just think he's naive, that he thinks he wants to get to the bottom of UFOs and he's suckered in by all these intel people. But it's very important because Farah he's the circular point. He's signing up the book deals. He's making the Hollywood deals through his friend, Steven Spielberg. Let's talk about that for a moment here. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Deep tonight. This is a powerful stream. X-Series 207. The X-Protect UFO file revealed. Age of disclosure exposed. And it needs to be exposed. It is the documentary put forward by the Central Intelligence Agency to create a UFO threat, financed by the Central Intelligence Agency, featuring CIA players, NGA players, NSA players. How many different intelligence monkeys do you want in there playing with the whole UFO theme? Think about it. We're going to be taking your questions here shortly, very shortly. Miss Olivia's putting them together. You can ask them now before I go any further. What do you got?
Twilight says, liars get rewarded.
Well, it's a problem. It's a problem. At the end of the day, of course.
Actually, it is. It's the problem of the Earth plane.
Oh, interesting point.
It's deception, actually. Is that you could just have honesty? I mean, think about it. And you say, You can imagine other planes of existence where there's no such thing as deception,
Yeah.
where everything, it's all just transparent. It's just authentic. It is what it is. There's no hiding anything. It's
Yeah.
actually the crux of the Earth.
It is. It is.
deception.
You could boil it down. I think what's more important, though, is, people are inclined. I've said this before, even with the imbalances in the world, like a while ago, people would be inclined to be like, oh, yeah, there's imbalances in the world, but like those billionaires out there, whatever, let them learn their own hard lessons, or these people doing these things. Now what's happened is those people are closing in on the general society. You see, they're squeezing the general society with the COVID op, with these deep state activities, with the false wars, with the digital ID. That's the problem. So you can't, there's no longer a place to just say, and a live and let live type situation with those types. So you're going to have to call them out, and you're going to have to bring it forward. They're forcing the issue. There's no question about it. Now, you want to do it legally, and you want to do it by the Constitution, and you want to do it with public awareness. That's the way to do it. You very often find the manipulation of that type of protest thing, that they'll send in agitators to say things like, we need to upset the flow of society by doing X, 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 and X. No, what you need to do is you can call out these things. And then when people raised to that level of awareness, the entire reality that they're living in changes. This is what we're talking about. And you might ask, how does that relate to the UFO file? Well, they've been building it. Look, it's something in the back of the imagination of people. And it's something that as a society at large, we're learning about. And it is a large scale mystery. I'm not sure you can capture that mystery in one lifetime, by the way. But whatever it is, you cannot have these people who've been hoarding that information because we put them in a protection, a level of protection for the country and things like that, those national defense, national security secrets, and they've used it as a way to exploit the public. See, this is where it gets very, very problematic. So I've always said you don't want government disclosure, in fact, but what they're trying to enforce on people, now they need to do it. They created enough of a buffer in the actual news reporting of the thing. Now they need to bring it to Hollywood in order to bring it to the public. This is what they figured out. Now, the problem is they're not floating on any facts. They haven't brought forward any evidence. It's a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's incredible tap dancing going on. That's what intel agents are good at, dangling things. Ooh, I can't tell you that because of my national security oath, but I will tell you this, and I'll hint at this, and all the rest of it. That is a really weird dance. And in a way, I want to kind of get us focused around this, but it makes them kind of UFO whistleblower prostitutes. And I think of Mellon as kind of the really high-priced pimp of the whole situation. So this is how he's playing it out. And these are his toys, to put out there. And they're dangling this whole thing before a national audience. It needs to be shot down. And it has been over and over again when you get good people involved dealing with it. Problem is the heavy duty rush of money into the space on the podcast side, and then the heavy duty Hollywood money makes it very difficult to get any real kind of signal through the noise. This is what we're doing here on this program. And I think we can bring that forward. That's what we've been able to do. And I'll tell you that things that have come off just from this show, just from the ideas from, just from the guests, the interactions we have in this show, have sent ripples out into that field. And some of those people who are agents on that side have come to me and said that to me. So, when we put forward things, let me tell you, the ripple effect runs very deep. Farah, a little more Farah on this. By his own calculation, Dan Farah, and remember, he's the director of Age of Disclosure. He's the guy who put it all together. He's the guy who handles all the book deals for the whistleblowers, and he's Spielberg's producer. That's a lot of influence. Don't ask me how Tony Danza is involved, but he is. By his own conclusion, Dan Farah watched Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T. the Extraterrestrial close to 1,000 times before he turned 15. I don't think so, because you'd have to go to the movies to do it back then. So it's hardly surprising that the 45-year-old Hollywood producer yearned to one day create a film that picked up where Spielberg's 2 fictional movies about alien visitations and government cover-ups left off. It's very interesting to note that Ronald Reagan, when he showed E.T. and he had Spielberg as a special guest, he showed it in the White House, and then he got up afterwards, unscripted, and said, everyone in this room knows that that movie is not fiction, it's fact. You know, here we have those things just hanging out in the background, these presidents who've had to deal with this subject before. Quote, I wanted to make a movie, says Farah, that I always wished existed, a documentary that did an unprecedented job at seriously, incredibly exploring what is actually known about UAPs. Well, the first thing you would do is call them UFOs, because UAP is just an intel term to pick up on the marketing side. And by the way, I think that's failed dramatically too. I don't see anybody real calling them that. Anyone who's gotten a chance to watch a screening of Farah's groundbreaking documentary, and they did some screenings before, they're putting it out November 21st, on Amazon. And I understand from a real Hollywood insider that they tried hard. They could not get the deal. Like, people saw the problems, which is that the main person they're focusing on, Elizondo, is heavily discredited from his own activities. And it's interesting to me that they even went forward with it, frankly, but I think they were too far in. Now they say the 45-year-old first-time director. Now that's true, but this guy has been very, very busy as an agent for these other people and producing Spielberg. So he's a major player, lots and lots of money behind him. Now here's the weird rub. You might remember a strange series of horror movies called Hellraiser, and this whole horror vibe that was going on. Farah is now producing and directing for HBO a series called Hellraiser that picks up where the movies left off. This guy is deep, deep in the scene. So he's doing an interview here, and it says, I'm sure that people have told you stuff off camera that you could not talk about in the doc. Are there any things you can share? I took a very journalistic approach to the whole thing and just did investigative research. Well, then you would have known you were surrounded by CIA people. Investigative interviews to pursue the truth. I did get told, somebody's got to clean that up. I did get told a lot of information from sources on the side that I said I wouldn't reveal publicly, so I'll stick to that honor. The more dangling of stuff without producing evidence, I see. But I had incredible support behind the scenes, not only from people in the film, but from a number of very high-placed government intelligence and military officials. Yeah, because you're helping them promote the UFO threat, right? Why else are they? Otherwise, if they had something here that was important, they wouldn't tell you anything. They're using you as the tool to do it, and you're happy to do it, right? I mean, let's face it. There were some people that I was sent to do interviews with who once I got perspective from some other people, I was like, okay, I'm going to leave them out. That's interesting to me because they weren't in the CIA club here. They weren't in the intelligence network, and so he left them out. I had a lot of support for making sure that this movie was bulletproof and that it could be evergreen. What? And really make a difference. So Farah shows up as somebody to me who is a very important interface for what those people are doing. Now, I stressed this before, and people like Farah, by the way, are always welcome on this show to talk about his documentary. Those people never will, because I ask the kind of questions that aren't going to do their film any good. But I will say this. You have to understand this, and from what I understand, that guy is watching this show tonight. So Farah, I will say this. Investigative journalism is adversarial journalism. It's not personal, and it can never be personal, or else you get out of the business because you'll cloud your own judgment. And it should not be mean-spirited either. But it is adversarial by its nature, because that's the only way you're going to get to the truth. For example, if you were investigating a major intel leader for fraud or something, you're not going to go hang out and have cocktails with them and then tennis afterwards, right? So you have to take it for what it is, which is if you're able to answer these things, you're wide open, baby. You can come on this program anytime and answer anything that I've said here. Everything I'm saying to my audience here about you and your documentary is 100% fact. And if there are any things that are hints or suppositions, I identify that very, very clearly. So it's up to you, you see. But what I will say is this, that documentary, Age of Disclosure, is just an intel arm directly into the public. And that's where they're going with it. 80 years of lies and deception. Is this film proof of alien life on Earth? This is the buzz that they're giving it. The Age of Disclosure, a provocative new documentary that argues for the existence of extraterrestrials, has drawn gasps. Yes, they should gasp at the amount of intel money that's involved here. But I think the higher fact or the higher point I'm trying to make with this is, who are the people behind it? A little more on Farah, and then we'll move into your questions. I have some great quotes, but I'll incorporate them into the question answer section. While I have your attention, especially if you're new here, remember to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for our free newsletter. It's a free newsletter. It keeps us in touch, and it lets you know about the incredible shows that we have coming up for you, interviews that'll blow your mind. Of course, we just did Eric Hecker. We have Dr. Farrell coming up, mind-blowing interview coming up with him, and a very exciting surprise interview for you in November that will completely blow your mind. X-series episodes off the charts. And of course, the docuseries, Craze in the Hot Zone, Pyramid X, and then of course, JFK and the UFO File. All of those new episodes in the background, brewing up for you, all at your fingertips in the newsletter. So you'll know about all the exciting things we have coming up for you there, appearances, everything else. It's all there in the free newsletter. Go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for that newsletter. Miss Olivia, before I go any further, what have you got?
Kevin Stickiver says, should be called Age of Psyop.
Oh, that's really true. Well, here's the thing. Here's what I wrote about it and put out publicly. I said, and I put this up on Twitter, let's get this straight. The CIA UFO Threat Big Budget Age of Disclosure documentary is narrated by discredited counter-intel agent Lue Elizondo, is directed by Elizondo's agent Dan Farah, who was also Steven Spielberg's producer, features CIA Jim Semivan, CIA Gary Nolan, friend of Anthony Fauci, CIA scientist Hal Puthoff, and former disgraced DNI, James Clapper. So Hollywood and the CIA get together and promote a UFO threat agenda, and then what? Paid, sellout, independent, quote, independent media promotes it? That's narrative control, not disclosure. Now, those are the facts. That's what you're looking at here. So when you're getting this fluff, when Megyn Kelly is promoting this stuff, she doesn't understand what the UFO File is, apparently. They just think of it for ratings. And then they're like, we're edgy. We're getting to the bottom of UFOs, and Tucker Carlson has Lue Elizondo on speed dial and things like that. These are CIA people, You're not going to get the truth from these people on that. Why don't you get people who do the real research and have a counter opinion to what the CIA is putting out? That's real journalism. But these people aren't doing that because they need to rush it through, because Daystar is in the background saying, you have to rush through that UFO thing, baby, because I've got the $10 million right here. That's not independent media. So, but that's what it's becoming. So you have to be able to identify the astroturfing that's going on, because you have to be able to separate what's potent from this stuff, and you see a lot of this stuff, by the way. And when this stuff invites me on to be guests and stuff like that, I don't go because I cannot reconcile myself to what they're up to. There are great people out there that are still doing fantastic work. And those are the people that I'll work with, and I will go on their show or have them on my show, whatever it happens to be. But there's a lot of stuff that I won't go near because they're in this, maelstrom of pop click podcastism. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 207, the X Protect UFO file revealed. I want to touch on some victims of X-Protect as well tonight. I think it's important, so I'll make time for that.
Can I
All right,
post something?
Spielberg, yes.
Okay, so David Donaway says in 2020, Haim Eshed, who headed the Israeli Defense Ministry's Space Directorate for nearly 30 years, said ETs are here and that humanity has been in contact with them.
Mm-hmm.
Sig the BS says, it's hard for me to believe that Haim Eshed confession wasn't bigger news.
Well, it was big news at the time. I think the problem there was that, they couldn't catch up to this guy. This guy was basically like the head of NASA for Israel. And what he was saying was, he said, Trump is where, this is back in 2019, Trump was in his first term. And this guy was saying, look, Trump knows about this. He's decided, the aliens have said to him, don't disclose, it'll be too disruptive. And he's decided not to do it. But I can tell you that they're here and all the rest of it. Now, regardless of what you think of the subject matter, regardless of where you sit on the scale of, aliens or whatever it happens to be, or if it's all human tech or whatever, that's a pretty extraordinary thing for the head of a space agency to come out with. And they try to make him very uncomfortable about it later, and he backed off, but he cut loose. And some of those guys get to a position where they will. And I think that's part of the risk for those aerospace companies, that these guys will cut loose. But I'm very glad you mentioned that. Okay. I need to get to this drone situation and how it relates to New Jersey, or else
we started with that like a
yes,
45
my whole
minutes
connecting
ago.
arc. Well, now we're all more informed, hopefully, in a lugubrious fashion. Okay, Steven Spielberg's UFO movie gets exciting update. Is filming wrapped, right? A little more. Spielberg on the Jersey Shore. He's doing it. Okay. Now, this is from 2 days ago. Remember all those drones over New Jersey skies? The mystery just got weirder. Fox News. Now, why did it just get weirder? First of all, a little while ago, like a few days ago, there was an explanation that said, you know what? There's something going on here. And it is that the drones themselves are this thing that needed to be explained that never was. And now there's an explanation. In Alabama, there was a whole thing about what was going on with the drones, in fact, and what had actually taken place there. So, at the time, the Biden administration wouldn't give anybody a heads up. At the time, President-elect Trump said, as soon as I get in, I'll tell everybody what it was. As soon as he got in, he didn't say anything about it, except I know what it was, and he didn't let anything go any further. Well, let's read a little bit about this, shall we? And remember, a few days ago, they came out and said, oh yeah, this company that's unnamed, that was at this aerospace panel in Alabama, came out and said, we were the ones who were doing the drones. Now, I want to say on the record that I pointed out that Northcom at the time was doing Homeland Synchronizer. This was an experiment, and it was run by the head of NORAD, who is the COG commander. Remember, he's a triple threat. He's also the head of Northcom. And this guy, General Gilday, he was doing this whole piece on this UAP versus UAV. That is unmanned aerial vehicle versus a UAP. That's what the whole test was. And my suggestion, coming down the middle with all of it, was no, what's going on? This is actually what's happening. And, the COG commander is running the test, and that's what we're seeing. And they are collecting and data mining responses to it, because there's no way you can have this stuff crowding your skies and they don't know what it is. It would be an act of war. I mean, come on. Over that area, New Jersey, New York, 9/11, hello, they're not going to allow it. So then they came out and said, oh no, it was explained, a couple of days ago. They're like, finally, we know what it was. It was just some drone company, but we can't say who it was, which is also ridiculous. Now, the rash of strange drone sightings across New Jersey and neighboring states late last year seemed destined to remain one of the great life's mysteries of life. Not on the New York Post's watch. On Saturday, nearly 10 months after the White House hand-waved sightings away as government-authorized activity, the Post reported that an unnamed private company had taken credit for the bizarre phenomenon. But the company, identified by New Jersey Advanced Media as an aerospace company headquartered in Palo Alto, California, now denies any roles in the sightings and said it has never flown aircraft over New Jersey. So now the explanation is debunked. We still don't know who the company is, by the way. They're holding back the name. The Post report emerged out of the U.S. Army's Unmanned Aircraft Systems and Launch Effects Summit, conference held in August at Fort Rucker in Alabama. Of course, Alabama is the home of Huntsville, Paperclip, the whole thing. Our space program, a great deal of it operates directly out of Huntsville. There, according to the Post, a private contractor demonstrated a compact aircraft with an unusual design, stubby-winged, low-flying, and nearly silent. After the demonstration, an employee told the small group, "Remember that big New Jersey drones wave last year? That was us. That was us." That's what he said. Now, the drone waves were serious and heavy duty here. You had figures who are even media figures coming out and saying, there are drones over my house, and it sounds like there's motorbikes up there. What's going on? So there were tons and tons of these reports, and the alternative media couldn't get their heads around it. They were like, people are hallucinating. Just shut up, So alternative media failed. Those people were thinking, that's good. They can't handle a real story. And then the mainstream media was just silent about it, and they stonewalled it. Now, it's very interesting because a little bit later, all these stories came out, and that same commander of COG came forward on 60 Minutes. And what did he say? Well, General Gillett said, this is what's going on here. We've had these drone swarms at our Air Force base there in Virginia and all over the country. And we don't know where they're coming from. Now, remember the COG setup, continuity of government setup, is if you flip that switch, suddenly you've got the COG combatant commander, the guy who heads up NORAD and NORTHCOM. He controls everything. No president, no Congress anymore. It's him. So if you get a big enough emergency, which is what they've been monkeying around with the rules since the 1980s, the COG piece can get called. You can flip yourself into martial law, and he's the commander. And he sets up regional governors, and that's the way they run the country until a new election can be called and the emergency's over, whenever that would happen. So you need a lot of detail for that Sky event. You need a lot of detail for that UFO threat. How are you going to get it? Well, if you launch a big drone wave, you see how people respond, panic, calm, tune it out, flip out about it, whatever it happens to be. You can get so much detailed information about how to run your UFO threat. You see how this works. So the other thing that could happen there is you could get data that would make you say, this is great. This is the time to do it. Or you could get data that would say, you know what? The way that they're responding, this isn't so good. Now, here's what happened. The drone waves moved over to Europe last month, okay, and part of this month, and we're still seeing reports. But throughout September and parts of October, I haven't heard a report this week, but up until this week, yes. You're seeing it in Denmark over and over again. And the leader of Denmark goes before all the cameras and says, I don't know what it is, but even if it is UFOs, like we're going to be on top of it. So, it's becoming a hardcore reality. And the Russians were saying, it's not us. It's not us. And frankly, it probably was not. So there's something very strange about the turn in the technology. And it looks to me like there's a third actor involved, somebody who's not accountable to either side. And there's a certain level of, sort of cringe, halting responses from the American government and the Russian government about what this thing is, because they cannot pinpoint where it's coming from. In Europe, over here, under New Jersey and, New York skies. They knew exactly what that was. That was our own continuity of government program. Now, you've had people out there, Palmer Luckey and Andrill, this whole thing about his warrior drones and all this stuff, and they're pumping this guy up. And I've done shows that have included him. I'll do something with a really heavy focus on him. But how I want to draw this all around is it's all related to this sky event that they need to pull off. They need the emergency, either in the form of the UFO threat or a drone swarm, unknown drone swarm. Essentially the same thing. And they get the ability then to call in emergency powers. Because at that point, whoever's running this stuff may not be able to get that ability of governing. They might not be able to get above 30% of the vote or whatever it happens to be. So we have to keep that in mind when I'm talking about things like age of disclosure and the misinformation being pumped through there by the intelligence agencies. They're doing a quickening to a kind of program, getting us along here. That's where we need to go with the way that we look at it. Finally, on this, and then we'll turn to your questions, and I'll roll in some important quotes here from previous researchers on this. This is the original explanation. I wanted to say it. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt shared a message from President Donald Trump on the source of the drone sightings reported over New Jersey. Private aerial contractor has reportedly taken responsibility for the swarms of mystery drones that wreaked havoc over New Jersey skies last year. Speaking at the Army's UAS Launched Effects Summit in Fort Rucker, Alabama in August, the unnamed company allegedly revealed during a panel that then manned aerial craft was to blame for the scare across New Jersey skies. An attendee told the New York Post. You remember that big UFO scare in New Jersey last year? Well, that was us. That's the same quote. The unnamed company reportedly told attendees at the Army's UAS and Launched Effects Summit that their aircraft was behind the mystery drones in New Jersey last year, according to the Post. The admission reportedly came as the company conducted a live demonstration of 20-foot aerial craft unique flight movements as it sped through the skies on 4 wings. I thought it was military testing, something on the other side of the base, the individual said while detailing their first impressions of the aircraft. The company claimed that their aircraft was performing exercises to test out their capabilities. It's actually to test out the reaction of the people on the ground. The Post reported the operations were reportedly not required to be disclosed to the public due to the company's government contract. That's ridiculous. The admission reportedly came as the company conducted a live demonstration. Okay. All conference attendees and demonstrations were reportedly required to be approved by the administration. Hundreds of drones were spotted overflying in New Jersey, etc. It's interesting. They closed the skies above Bedminster, which is the New Jersey version of Mar-a-Lago, and Trump wouldn't go there during the time it was happening. And it was weird that it was happening during the time he was president-elect, not quite president yet. And of course, my mind instantly went to the program of what we've been looking at tonight, which is the age of disclosure type people working in the background, building this up. And in the heart of that program and controlling the whistleblowers is Chris Mellon, the DOD billionaire. And he is in the heart of this, trying to promote this UFO threat. Now, I have more to go through, including on some of these figures like James McDonald, Amy Eskridge, Mark McCandlish, and others who died very, very mysteriously, being involved with this advanced technology or suggesting it or somehow getting it across. Some of them I were lucky enough to interact with at one point or another. But I think it's important to understand the level of what's going on there when you have a secret technology and these two worlds interacting. And this whole world that's coming in with the X-Tech, they can't afford to have it leak before it's time. They want it to go their way and with their purposes and with their threats in mind. So you can see the stakes are very high for that. We'll get into what that's all about. But now, Miss Olivia, I am turning it over to you and your questions.
All right, David Donaway. Now to the Dark Journalist theme question. Will the UFO file disclosure come out before the Epstein client list? Will we get full COVID disclosure before we get UFO disclosure? And Scarlet Fire, why would we expect disclosure when the government is using alien technology to take over humanity?
Well, that's a real good question, actually. Look at, here's the way I think I would look at it. Just like, you have 62 years come November of the JFK assassination. You don't have any real explanation from the government about what happened. They have a false explanation. Everyone knows it's false. And, they've let out records here and there about it. Anyone who's studied it understands that, the Kennedy assassination was an inside job. They haven't been able to pin down the operation itself and who exactly was involved. One of the key things that we put across is that aerospace was deeply involved in it, because the rub that we're facing, the kind of inflection point that we are at in history, reveals itself through space and low Earth orbit technology. There's no question in my mind. The whole root of what the Nazis were trying to do and what we got out of Paperclip was they were going to control from space stations everything that happened on Earth. That was their goal. And then, to maraud onto other planets and things like that and reclaim their, Martian godhood and all that stuff. But the essential thing, rule what's on the ground from above. You're in space. These guys are down there. And right now we're seeing everything is being operated in this fashion. But aerospace is curiously missing from so much deep state research. And that is very purposeful, in my opinion. The problem is aerospace shows up in the heart of all of these deep events in our history that have to do on this level. I've put forward before that the death of Senator Kennedy, who was going to become President Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, who was John Kennedy's brother, he was assassinated by a Skunk Works employee, security guard, Payne Caesar. He wasn't assassinated by Sirhan Sirhan. And however you want to even that out, why is this guy getting a job at the hotel that Robert Kennedy is going to be there 3 days before Robert Kennedy gets there? And then he's the guy directly behind him who actually has a gun and is holding on to him. As a matter of fact, one of the sort of horrifying details of that assassination is if you look at the pictures of Robert Kennedy's assassination, he has a tie in his hand. And that's the tie that he grabbed off of Caesar's. It was one of those clip-on ties.
I never knew that.
Yeah, I don't have a picture of it, but he's holding the tie.
Oh.
So, and this guy went to the Philippines. I had a long conversation with RFK Jr. about his interactions because he approached this guy. He knew he had fled to the Philippines, and he was nearing the end of his life. And this guy probably wanted to have some money for his family or something. And he was arranging to give Robert Kennedy the details of how he was involved. But there was a guy who worked for Howard Hughes. And I had all this interaction with him and his son. Unfortunately, he passed away. But his son still has a great deal of information. And he fled to Canada, but he was Howard Hughes' right-hand man. And one of the reasons that he fell out of favor was that Bob Mayhew, who ran everything for Hughes after Hughes was just locked away in the top suite in Las Vegas, he recognized when the assassination happened, this guy recognized Caesar when he came up in the reports. And he said, oh, when I went to Las Vegas to meet with Hughes and stuff, Bob Mayhew would always bring him along. So Mayhew is deeply involved in the CIA assassination plots in Cuba and other places. So he was, Thane Eugene Caesar was the guy who was palling around with him. And Caesar came out of Skunk Works. Skunk Works is the most secretive, reverse engineering development of UFO craft that we had. Ben Rich, he was the epitome of that. So, for Lockheed to have this guy there behind Senator Kennedy to clear the way for Nixon to get in, and Nixon was the one who got Hughes Aerospace off the ground in the first place. I mean, if you look through the lens of aerospace, you can see the landscape of the American political situation a lot better in my opinion, that's why I focus so much on the UFO file, the exotic technology behind it, the apotheum effect at the heart of it, of course, the X technology. Yes, what do you got?
I'm waiting for someone to respond. Do put the
Oh, yeah,
second
yeah.
part of
Well, in
their
the meantime,
question up.
I've got a little sideshow here. You know how I like to track these movies that are coming out that are related to alien abduction? In this case, it's the Betty and Barney Hill case. And I pointed this out that there's an Obama movie. This is the first one, of course. Obama Netflix making a movie about alien abduction of my grandpa, Barney Hill, UFC's Angela Hill. That is actually Barney Hill's granddaughter. And she found out that the Obamas were making this movie, and she's insisting that, she should have some kind of a role in it. And it's very interesting because the Obamas have kind of shut her out. And it was weird, she even went on the Joe Rogan show, and Joe Rogan didn't know. He had her on as a UFC fighter. He didn't realize that she was related to Barney Hill. Can you imagine? That's a problem. But now there's Demi Moore, who you've met, of course.
I've massaged.
You've massaged and done therapy for her. Demi Moore, Coleman Domingo lead Strange Arrivals. It's a love story based on the Betty and Barney Hill alien abduction case. Yeah, Betty and Barney Hill are now swinging hipsters, and this is what's going on. These are the movies that are coming out, baby. Watch out. Okay, what do you got?
Okay, so Soldier's Voice for Life says Paul Hellyer told us a galactic federation exists and has been working with Earth military cleaning up the malevolent workings humanity needed help with because of how delayed in information we are. If you could make sense of that question.
Oh, yeah. Well, he said it on my show.
Mhm.
In fact, I don't know what to make of this Galactic Federation idea, but there's so little proof for it that it's hard to discuss it. And yet it's interesting that somebody with a character and a level as the former Defense Secretary of Canada would talk about this on this level. Was he being given that information? Did he know it firsthand? What I got from him very clearly is he told me point blank that the UFO file was real and that the Canadian government and the US government were completely aware of it. No question about it. So he was, as matter of fact as you can be about it. And he felt that there were forces who were behind the financial situation in the world, that they were the exact same forces that were behind the secrecy of the UFO file, that they were intermingled. It was the same thing. So the same people, the same X-Protect group that was keeping that information out of public hands were the same group that were manipulating the financial system. So, and that group is a coalescence of different interests, and you're not going to be able to point it to like, it's the Masons or the Jesuits or the Jews or something like that. You're not going to find answers that way. It's a stateless actor. It doesn't work to find that type of group think. What you look for is the coalescence of where these interests come together. And what Hellyer was telling me was that the group that was controlling the UFO cabal were the same people controlling the financial cabal. And that is the big realization, because if you go through his books, and I have them all here with his dedications and stuff, they're half about the UFO file. The other half is about, this whole piece of the financial system, because he knew it very, very well. And he felt like that Federal Reserve was a system that was just crushing America. So, that's how I see my answer on that. That I can say for a fact. In terms of the Federation thing, maybe we'll learn something like that is true someday. It's hard to say. But certainly there's some activity that seems coordinated and seems like ramps up at different times. And, I think it's so hilarious that there's this thing about, oh my goodness, and all these podcasts are like, they say that there's UFO bases underwater, Look, if you read UFO literature, you'll find a 1954 book or whatever, all the stuff about underwater UFOs. They've known about this. We've followed it for a long, long time. And, you find them in places where it's very hard to detect. But yeah, they can go under the water. Absolutely. But the idea that this is some big realization or something, and it's hilarious, So I think we just need to all get together on the fact that there's an awful lot of UFO research that's already on the books. And that, what you need to do is move from there past the like sensationalism to some kind of a understanding, some kind of a field. And the first rule you need to adopt in that field, in my opinion, is no intel people. Forget about it. No CIA people for sure. That'll improve things dramatically immediately. And the group that'll bring forward the best information, in my opinion, would be a civilian group working with various disciplines, psychic and otherwise. Yes.
Walter Bosley says stifling the narrative is controlling the narrative.
True. Think about it. That it's very interesting because the counterintelligence stuff, what it did with all the tic tac and all that stuff, the real UFO research got buried, didn't it? What was actually going on? We got stuck with that stuff. And remember, even in their own, dry narratives about this stuff, those incidents took place in 2004, 2005. What about the 20 years in between? So these were all to serve, this whole thing so that Lue could say, I'm telling you, it's about a change of species, and stuff like that, and putting him on some kind of a ladder like, oh, he knows secret intel or whatever, when this guy has just come out and lied publicly over and over again. I mean, how many times do you have to lie in public, get caught at it, and then insult and go after your critics and threaten them before people just say, you're fit to be tied. You are, and they would have chosen another guy to do this, but Elizondo is the epitome of the arrogance of the intelligence community. And the other thing is, remember, they all work for the government. So the whole narrative that they came out with and brainwashed many people with, and I had to do a lot of unbrainwashing in my own work, and frankly, I'm sick of it. What they had to do, if they had to come out and say, we're against that government needs to give us the truth. They are all government people. If they were so hardcore on that, they should have got out of the government, right? They're still with the government. They still contract with the government. They're full of it. So you have to get real about that. They're not whistleblowers at all. They're the pawns of DOD billionaire Chris Mellon. And that's the fact.
I'm going to ask you to connect some dots
for
a second. Okay, so we know from Aaron Russo back in, I think it was 2006 when he talked to Alex Jones, that, they want to chip us all, right? It's a big bankers takeover. And, it's so obvious now, this is not news, but in 2006, it was pretty revolutionary. But there are specifically Christians who will not take the mark of the beast. But if it is linked somehow to aliens being among us, and that we need to separate, we need to be able to identify them, and aliens maybe being demons.
Oh, yes.
Is this, do you see anything like this coming? Because they're not going to take the chip any other way.
Yes, that's an excellent point. Let me tell you, how much does that cut right to the heart of what we're talking about? Because you see all the conservative influencers, whenever they get around this, they're like, oh, the fallen ones are operating, advanced technology, and they're turning the alien thing into the alien demon threat to make it go down easy with the Christian side. That's also, a very deceptive manipulation meant to bring out a particular type of reaction. These people, in order to take that type of control, in a way, Christians are one of their biggest problems. And we've seen them downgrade Christians for years. And now what they're trying to do, there's a pandering thing that's going on. And, I've seen it. I mean, I watched that whole Tucker Carlson thing. When they do this thing when after the Charlie Kirk assassination, now they have these conservative people coming out following in his footsteps. Unfortunately, they don't do those meetings as well as the original guy did. It's like having a lot of Elvis impersonators. It's not working out. And so this guy comes up to him and says, you're worth $50 million. And, I want to get to the bottom of who influences you. And Tucker says, shut up, and like, stop reading things on the internet. I'm not worth $50 million. My God. And by the way, Tucker Carlson, he says a lot of interesting things. He sometimes can cut to the bottom of it, but with this, he just didn't do very well. And what happened was he said, you know, you're so stupid or something to that effect, and stop being dumb. And the guy was like, don't get so excited. Jesus Christ, I was just citing a number. And, Tucker was like, thou shalt not take thy Lord's name in vain. Right? Yeah, come on. What are you, Mother Teresa now? I mean, this is ridiculous. You're Tucker Carlson. You are a Christian. And,
right. And part of the thing that makes Tucker Carlson cool at all is that he is kind of cool, right? Like, this, like him being uptight isn't on brand at all.
Right. This guy, I mean, come on. So the idea of him is like Ayatollah Carlson or something. This is the problem. You have to get out of that whole thing. That's a certain type of brainwashing as well, and so you want the real Christianity. And what they're trying to do with the UFO thing is so, this is a very sneaky aspect of what they're trying to put across here. They're trying to say, oh, you think that the UFOs are demons and that the demons are after us, and that if I use, the Holy Spirit, I can get rid of these demons. Well, look, when I always go back to Gordon Cooper, when he was in Germany in the early 50s doing his flight training, his whole squadron would go out and do this flight training, and then these UFOs would show up right behind them and do the flight training right behind them. And then they would do it better, he said, faster, and then they would speed off, at dizzying speeds. So that's obviously a technological development. Somebody intelligent, he was very clear in his later interviews, that stuff was being intelligently controlled. So, those aren't demonic apparitions. They're some kind of other technical force imitating your flight plan. How does that make them demonic? It doesn't. Now, are there demonic entities? Go deep into the Steiner research around Ahriman, as we've done the Mystery School shows on here. We have many more to come. And of course, there's a demonic realm. And when you deal with religion and Christianity and all the rest of it, you're going to get it. But don't mix these things up, because it gets very, very problematic, because you're also dealing with something that is technical that also has this other side to it. And when you think about apotheum and the way that you're kind of realm shifting when you're dealing with these things, that's a deeper level and a deeper science than somebody who just understands dimensions, say, from a scientific point of view. So there's a lot of things going on with that. But I'm glad you asked that question, because I see a narrative there trying to just pawn off aliens as demons. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. It's X Series 207. This is the X Protect UFO file revealed. Remember, X Protect is the group that keeps the secret of the UFO file. If they have to do that through misdirection by saying, here, I'm giving you the UFO file, they'll do it that way, but they'll give you a false version. Remember, there's a real UFO file, and then there's the CIA BS circus version of it. 90%, 95% of what you see is that circus, especially now. The other thing I want to mention to you is that, we have very exciting shows coming up for you. Make sure that you're on that newsletter at darkjournalist.com so you can get that information in case the social media networks are just blocking the stuff off, which they've been known to do. Yes. What do you got?
Okay, Scarmoj. So you are claiming that NASA have the UFO file, but we have been told that most, if not all, of everything connected to the Apollo missions is lost?
Oh, whoa.
Also, Roger Z. How can humans pass through the radioactivity of the Van Allen belt and survive? That's a question that comes up a lot.
How did you write smash that like button and ask those questions at the same time? This is a miracle. Look, the thing about the Van Allen belt, the question that came up originally was, how can we get through it without getting singed by the radiation? And what they realized early on is that as long as you didn't hang out in the Van Allen belt, the astronauts wouldn't be radiated that way. Now, I'll tell you something, though. Since you mentioned astronauts, you really got me, because there's a fantastic, fantastic book that comes out all the way in 1978. 1978, they were very close to the moon landing and what had taken place there. They were close to the Apollo program. They understood everything that was going on. And the questions that came up about it were quite fascinating, but none so fascinating as what I found in this classic book about it. Now, remember, I'm someone who believes, of course, that we went to the moon and beyond. But nonetheless, the way it was portrayed and the things that were hidden about it, we have a very faulty version of that history. So in this Bill Kaysing book, it's We Never Went to the Moon, and people in that, ilk of research will recognize his name, definitely. Were the astronauts Manchurian candidates? Listen to this. Buzz Aldrin said, there was a lack of reality about everything, a kind of euphoric strangeness to all that was going on. Following his return to Earth, Buzz Aldrin experienced an increasingly severe mental illness. Sampling of quotes from his revealing book, Return to Earth, provides a basis for analysis. Quote, the kind of tension that simmered for the next few weeks, but never surfaced. We were to become public relations men from space for space exploration, in a sense. Salesman. The word made me terribly uncomfortable and self-conscious when it was first used. And a surprise, the people who lined the streets were exceedingly polite, but not at all enthusiastic. This was his reception when he went to Sweden. Very odd. I felt all 6 of us were fakes and fools for allowing ourselves to be convinced by some strange concept of duty. My intellect was not separated by the jagged and dangerous wall of my emotions. The rule of my emotions was absolute and ruthless. I yearned for a brightly lit oblivion. I wept for it. Should anyone discover I was in the hospital for nervous problems, the explanation was to be that I was being treated for a neck problem. The other problem, if at all possible, was to be kept secret. The other problem. The last 2 years of my life, from the time I left the lunar quarantine hospital until I entered Wilford Hall, the mental hospital, were characterized by depression, which occasionally deepened and then rose to a temporary brief high optimism. My life was unreal. And then finally, he's at this press conference, and I think I have it here. It's the NBC newscaster Roy Neal asks him this question. The afternoon of the banquet, I stopped by Roy's motel and asked if he wanted to run over any questions with me. He assured me there'd be very easy questions to answer and no preparation would be necessary. So he sits down for these press questions. Now, this is 3 years after the moon landing, too. The first question that Roy Neal asked me was, now that almost 2 years have gone by, why not tell us how it really felt to be on the moon? If any one question was anathema to me, that was it. Roy, I suppose he felt he had no choice. Yet it had always been my almost impossible for me to answer the question with any sort of decent response. My throat went dry. I became dizzy. Carefully, I picked my way through a reply, thinking of all the test pilots in the audience would burst out into laughter. I remember a little more of that interview. When it was over, I stepped down and stood before about 50 Chamber of Commerce members and their wives, all waiting for autographs. I signed a few, and when the shaking became uncontrollable, I grabbed my wife and ran for the door. So something's wrong there, beyond astronaut jitters. There's no question. And there's some programming that is going wrong, so that when they ask him the direct question, what was it like to be on the moon? Something is off. And I think it's quite revealing indeed. So once you said moon, this is where I went to. There's something there involved in the space program that we don't know anything about on a public level. But in my opinion, it relates directly to what was taking place in the Kennedy administration. That they were aware of this and they were dealing with it as an actual
You want to say what
issue.
it is?
Well, this relates to the Blue program, and that's in my Blue documentary. So it goes deeper there, but we'll keep rolling with
Well, it
questions.
sounds like his mind was wiped. And
Yes.
yeah, I mean,
Yes. No
that's
question.
not hard to believe.
I think the thing is that when they went up there, they saw certain things and they could not be allowed to retain that experience, much in the same way as when you go in for an alien abduction experience. That's what happens too. The mind is wiped out, the memory is wiped out, and yet it's right there, comes in through dreams, it seeps in, and finally, a hypnotist, something brings it out. I always mention Charlie Fultz, who I met very spontaneously and accidentally long time before I was doing this kind of reporting. And he was one of the Allagash guys who got grabbed. And we started talking about all this. And one of the things that he was explaining to me was watching the other guys get examined. And I said, what were the beings like? And he's like, half the guys that I was abducted with, they said later, they thought that they had some kind of an evil thing going on. And then one of the guys thought he was getting almost like a spiritual enlightenment. He said, what I saw were very methodical, dedicated scientific workers. And
that looked like bugs.
well, yeah, that's the mass art students, the twin. One of the mass art students says his description was, the aliens basically what they look like were insects in spandex, bugs in spandex. So that's what's waiting out there. No wonder they didn't want to tell us about it, right? But anyway, yeah, you get the idea there. The mental manipulation is too much to take with us. And remember the stories about the techs and the people who worked around the UFO file all the way back to the Aztec case. They work in there and then 20 minutes later, they have to drag them out. Why? The same reason the weird stories about the NASA astronauts. When they went up there, they saw the visage of their deceased relative, loved ones who had passed on. This happened to the scientists in the Aztec case too. So, you're breaching a door between realms when you're dealing with this stuff. That's how it needs to be looked at. And yet, for some reason, it needed to be raised in our consciousness in that period, probably because we were within a hair's breadth of destroying ourselves. That would be my best guess. Yes.
David Donaway, the technology needed to go to Mars and survive likely implies nearly all operating systems of civilization on Earth could be overhauled to totally eradicate poverty and hunger and lack of water.
Right, exactly.
Precisely.
Yeah, I mean, the idea, what Musk is saying about, we need to colonize Mars because, humanity consciousness needs to survive there, that's all hype. All you would need to do is develop a program for the Earth with all your money for balancing the resources on the planet. These people don't want to do it. You see, it's fine when they talk about a carbon tax for us to clean up the planet. I'm fine. Hey, listen, I'm not an anti-environmentalist. Clean up the planet. You guys, Amazon, Exxon, all these other companies, they destroyed the environment. So they're the ones who profited off of that great destruction. I'll tell you what, I will very happily vote for in Congress now a 20% surtax on all corporations to clean up the environment. You don't need to have any carbon tax on individuals at all. You guys have the money. You have more money to burn than anybody. So how about you guys take care of it? Seems reasonable. You made the most money off of it, right? It's a very reasonable explanation. I'm going straight for Congress on that one. I'm going to win. Okay.
So Claire is bringing up the ring makers of Saturn.
Oh, boy.
Would you like to address that?
Look, this is so important. And you have to give Carrie Cassidy credit for this too, because she tracked down the scientist before he went underground. And Norm Berggren, he wrote a very unusual book. It was very hard to get in the 1980s called The Ring Makers of Saturn, where they saw these tremendous ships going into the rings of Saturn and like basically refueling. And they would report this to President Reagan, who was flipping out. And he started to talk very openly with the Russians about joining against this UFO threat that was coming in, and then trying to prep the world by talking before the United Nations and saying, hey, I tell the story often about Colin Powell, who in his own autobiography was like, I had to run around. Reagan was always putting this alien stuff in his speeches. I had to run around with an eraser. I kicked myself that when he got to the UN, I didn't do it. But also there was another occasion where he went to a Maryland high school and he also talked about this in dramatic terms. So Reagan, the person who felt that he could bridge it, he could bring that America, the spirit of that patriotic America from his youth, and he had brought America back. Now he could bring us to deal with the UFO file. And I think there were a lot of efforts there to do it. And I think, again, the waves of disclosure from the 70s, the 1980s, and that disclosure of the 90s, it was all there in the mix. It got shot down, and John Warner IV tells the story of being with Bobby Inman at one of these events in Washington, D.C., talking with him, and Inman saying, "Oh, disclosure, what they're doing with the whole UFO file and the technology, it's all coming out, and I'm excited because they're going to be able to reveal what the Navy's been working with and all this stuff." And 3 months later, 9/11 happened. Zip. None of that disclosure went forward. So that's the way these things have worked. They've got it, and they have that advanced technology in the background, and now they're plugging in what story and how to roll it out with the most control and the most profit. And that's where the wars over NASA and Musk and all that are coming from. That's where the New Jersey drone scares are coming from. That's where the age of truth, CIA plaster over everything with the wallpaper of misinformation and false disclosure come from. It's all related. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to pair these two. David Dunaway, getting rid of NASA would piss off a lot of Nazis and Masons.
Yeah.
And along those lines, Kenneth Fort says, my father was Werner von Braun's boss for a while in the early Saturn V development. He also saw the plans to send astronauts to Mars, but the date was by 1986.
Interesting. I'm going to suggest that you email me at admin@darkjournalist.com, and I'd love to hear about your dad and how he was associated with von Braun. So, but that's very interesting. I wanted to bring this up, which is someone who was trying to give us a message about this advanced craft was Mark McCandlish. Now, he was part of the secret space program conferences that we did, and then he died under suspicious circumstances of a shotgun blast, and they ruled it off as a suicide. There were some very odd things with it. A very close friend of his got in touch with me shortly after that tragedy happened with him and told me about the plans that he had going on and things, and that it was very, very unusual that this happened this way. I'm going to read a little bit about McCandlish to understand, in my opinion, how the X-Protect group works, and it works on a high level, or it may work on an obscure level, anybody who's associated with these things. Okay, Mark McCandlish was a well-known artist and UFO expert who specialized in aviation and conceptual art for the defense and aerospace industries. His father had a long career in the U.S. Air Force, which led to Mark's lifelong fascination with aircraft. Mark first witnessed a UFO in Westover Air Force Base in Massachusetts. That's Western Mass. And he was 14 years old. That was 1966. He observed the strange craft through an 80-power telescope for about 10 minutes before it suddenly accelerated out of sight at an extreme velocity. Later, now, McCandlish would be working and contracting for different government groups, and by accident, he didn't have the clearance for it. They showed him a version of this Fluxliner aircraft that we had, and was demonstrated because, remember, he was a tremendous sketch artist, and they needed sketches of these things. Of course, that's him with the sketch. Now I'm going to mention his death here, and then we're going to back up again. So later, now, the UFO encounter that UFO encounter began a decades-long quest by Mark to learn the science behind the incredible technology that enabled this performance. In 2021, just before his sudden death, Mark contacted Senator Marco Rubio for the Senate Intelligence Committee, offering to provide testimony on what he knew about the exotic aerospace technology and its secret government sequestration. It seems highly suspicious that immediately after offering to come forward as a witness, he was found shot and killed with a shotgun blast to the head. Now, this thing about using a shotgun to commit suicide, as tragic and sad as the whole thing is, I can tell you it's very rare. And usually the whole explanation of suicide around a thing like this is the most convenient, and therefore they won't follow up. Now, there were a couple of interesting things, and one of them, of course, was written by our friend Dr. Farrell. I'm going to see if I can get that. But they did put out a movie about his work before he died. That was all about the flux liner. It was just a documentary, and I think that this is way more important than the Age of Disclosure documentary. Another shot of that craft that he drew, that he observed, that we had in our possession that was one of ours, okay? But it may have been a redeveloped craft, as it were. So he was really exposing with that the secret space program piece. So Mark's death appears to have been a part of an ongoing pattern of silencing whistleblowers. See, I agree with that. In fact, McCandlish was known for his testimony on the alien reproduction vehicle. He presented detailed blueprints of the ARV, which is reverse-engineered alien spacecraft capable of superluminal speed. McCandlish claimed that the ARV had been in use by the military for decades.
For decades.
Yeah, and
Wow.
his sketches were so convincing. And here's something that Dr. Farrell wrote about at the time. And he was saying, I'm very open to whatever explanation that this is, but he wanted to put this on the record. Why would anyone want to get rid of Mr. McCandlish? I do not know, but the details in the article do point in a couple of directions. That underground breakaway civilization itself, anxious to keep the secrets, and another peculiar detail that is revealed in the article, namely that McCandlish's belief that he had been in contact with someone claiming to be an extraterrestrial among us in a human biosuit. Now, this is very interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, there's a few people that I've talked to who have said this, and but Farrell found it an interesting detail, and I do as well. Finally, he says, McCandlish's belief he'd been in contact with someone who claiming to be an extraterrestrial among us in a human biosuit, in disguise, as it were, is reminiscent of the old science fiction television series V and its more recent remake. McCandlish's statements that telekinetic murder, for want of a better expression, was not only possible, but that it had been carried out on North Korea's previous leader. What is odd to contemplate here is that the first of these alternatives is the one where there are the most publicly known details. So the bottom line for me again is I too reject the official story. Look, when people get into possession of this type of information and then come out, as he did in our conferences, and that's going back a decade now, and then he dies under suspicious circumstances in 2021, and people like, who were close to him got in touch with me and said, he had all kinds of plans for what he was doing in the future. There are a number of stories like this, and the better way for us to see these stories, as a preventative measure, is to have the people that are working on these types of things in a very visible group, in a visible community, and completely off from dealing with these types of people, the counterintelligence CIA people. As a matter of fact, the person who's been coming up a lot is Amy Eskridge, and there's more to be learned there. But she was somebody who also was working on this anti-gravity thing, and her father was a NASA scientist, and she was found dead at 34.
Also by a shotgun blast. Right?
Also by a shotgun blast. And she was claiming, you know, in videos and interviews and things that she did before, that she realized the stuff that she had. Now, she said that Lue Elizondo and Hal Puthoff had approached her, and her comments about them was very interesting, because she said she wanted everyone to know that they were both evil.
Right, she used that word
Yeah.
specifically, evil.
So that's a quote. You know, you have to wonder what these people are doing, and the way that people like Elizondo and others are used and put in these different situations. You know, my own feeling is that you're side by side with a very dark, you know, regime there, and you have got to get a handle on what to listen to, and, you know, what to take at face value, et cetera, when you deal with this stuff. Because the CIA thing, you know, they have a particular modus operandi, and the X-Protect piece is to secure the UFO file and all its trappings, like anti-gravity, the apotheum knowledge, and all the rest of it. So it's interesting. The other thing that Eskridge put on the record, and you know, there are people who will put out more about her as time goes on. She co-founded and led the Institute for Exotic Science in Huntsville, Alabama, by the way.
I can't tell you how many times Huntsville has come up in the last week.
Incredible. Yeah.
All kinds of different places. In
Wow.
different contexts. It's crazy.
Well, the other thing that she said was, as soon as she brought up having a group talk with an Army general and Lue, those people cut off communication. They did not want to be subject to any kind of, you know, they were doing infiltration on an intelligence level with this girl. They didn't want to be observed by the military involved in this. It was an intel operation. So they cut off completely.
That is interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I think it says a lot. It shows you the trustworthiness of people like Lue and Puthoff. You cannot trust those people when it comes to these very sensitive topics. And like I said, it could have been somebody else that they had doing it, but in that role, these people, you know, and here you are, you know, in the public who are interested in UFOs, you are supposed to, on November 21st, get this documentary that comes out that's supposed to answer all the questions. And the guy narrating the whole thing is probably the most untrustworthy guy in the entire field. So, you know, you have to get real when you deal with the UFO file. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. Whew, it's X Series 207. And, you know, we salute those who are trying to bring forward deeper information, whether that information dealt with exotic technology, you know, exotic energy, and information about anti-gravity in the UFO file. Those people came under a particular type of sinister radar. It's very unfortunate. Yes.
Najat says, when I went to Huntsville, everyone knows it's in the city that all the Nazi scientists were shipped there.
Whoa. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, you know, Huntsville is beautiful and Alabama is beautiful. You know, these aerospace companies and the defense contractors, they're going to be somewhere. You know what I find very interesting is when we did the secret space program conference in Bastrop, now in Bastrop that's part of the spaceport, and it's the space community of Elon Musk's SpaceX. So, but we got there about 5 or 6 years before he did that. So isn't that interesting? Huh. Wow. I want to mention James McDonald as the final piece on that with X-Protect. And I'll just say this, that, you know, Morris Jessup was a classic case of this, and he died in, I think it's 1958. But what's so important about Jessup's death is he was somebody, again, who was getting into the anti-gravity secret. And Thomas Townsend Brown, who we've done a number of shows on, and I've talked to his family members at length. You know, he knew when he was working on black projects for the government that there were forces involved, that, you know, he would take the family to Eleuthera Island, and they'd be surrounded by security forces for a period of time, and they'd go back to work. But this technology lends itself to it because there are rogue groups that are involved, and then there are groups that are known to the government that operate in this shadowy corridor between intelligence and aerospace. That is the X-Protect group. I've tried to put the focus on them, and that committee, the task force committee, could have taken all of that information about the UFO file and the JFK assassination, and they could have combined it and really blown open the whole story. Instead, you got sleepy stories about, George Knapp smuggling information that was supposed to be revolutionary, and then you realize somebody copied Helena Blavatsky's book, about humanoids, and anyone can get access to that book. So the task force was a dud. Doesn't mean it can't be done. I guess that's the point of that. Miss Olivia, we'll take 2 more questions, and then I'll read these quotes, and we're done.
Okay. The real Wayno. If Ben Rich's claim that we can take ET home, NASA has found habitable planets, and 200,000 people go missing a year, is it possible that the government has the capacity to reseed another planet? Is that not the end goal?
Well, I think part of the problem is looking at everything from a materialist point of view, which I believe that they are. But if you look deeply into the mystery school work, you're going to see there's a whole developmental plan that includes physical and spiritual development. And in anthroposophy and Steiner's work, the culmination of it all is New Jupiter, or that becomes the new Earth, right? And so in that normal stream of evolution, it would happen. This idea that, Musk will save the light of consciousness to Mars and all, it's all completely fabrication of his own fantasy, probably DARPA's fantasy through his own mind. So it's not, it doesn't take into account, it's a very harmonic position, which is it separates your entire spiritual life, and it just operates with this physical thing. When the physical, spiritual, mental piece overlaps completely with each other, you can't separate the spiritual life from the physical life. So, the idea of reseeding a planet and all the rest of it, there's a natural scientific trend to just think of things on that level. But the evolutionary path that we can very clearly see that we're on here, it takes place on the Earth, and that spiritual trail that's being interrupted, that is talked about in the mystery schools with all the information around the 8th sphere and everything, is to lock you in and to separate you from your own spirituality, you see. So if I can just address you and make you think, everything is scientifically, this is the story as Steiner tells it, that in the 1840s, they had these scientists come forward in Germany. And the guy who did it was young, too. I think he was 25 years old. And he said, the scientific materialism is what has to be the rule of the day. Anything that can't be weighed or measured doesn't exist. And this whole thing cut out all ideas of any spirituality. And it came on very strong, so strong that those groups in the mystery schools said, look at this. We're not going to recognize humanity in 100 years if this goes on. They're just going to be completely scientific automatons. So we need to do something. And a small portion of those groups decided we're going to push the information out. And it came out in very strange ways, including things like the Fox sisters and things like the spiritual seance craze and all this grasping for the other realms. And this is part of it. It's the technological transformation. And what that does is it locks us in with a previous era. It's like a recurrence from a previous time of Atlantean technology, which was so advanced. That's why we're starting to become aware of that part. And it's taking a long time, probably too long, to be honest with you. With the Casey information and all the mystery school stuff, theosophy and anthroposophy, we probably should be much further along on the Atlantean trail. And that's why we focus on it deeply here. But I hope that that's some kind of an answer for you on that. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Okay, is this the last question?
It is indeed.
All right, so everybody's asking about Three Eye Atlas.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Amarillo Gunrunner says, is Three Eye Atlas a psyop or just a rock? And Opium Face says, what are your thoughts on the Three Eye Atlas Project Blue Beam play?
I think there are strange things out there. It's funny. I think they've kept things like Three Eye Atlas off of our radar previously. That's where you see all those fireballs everywhere, you know, and it's not just that everybody has a cell phone. The amount of fireballs that are exploding everywhere from Russia to Canada, you know, I mean, it is major. And I think that this is part of a shift that's going on out there that they're observing, and why a lot of these elite types were racing to get to the billionaire bunkers and all the rest of it, is they saw this incoming possibility. The Three Eye Atlas thing was used by Avi Loeb, and he is from Talpiot Intelligence. Okay, so he's right over here. His astrophysics lab is literally like a 5-minute walk for me. And what's going on with Avi is he was put in that position where these guys are going to run the threat thing over here and all that stuff. You're going to come in and say, you know, Oumuamua is AI trying to contact humanity, give it instructions, you know, help the environment, or whatever it is. And so you have this dynamic that's going on. But he came out immediately and said, you know, oh, don't make any plans past October 29th, you know, pack up your house. And not talking very much like a scientist. He was really going for it. And remember, he's doing the same thing that the drone, you know, swarms are doing, which is getting intel that they can data mine. And they can data mine that intel for how do you react to a threat from space. And that's what they're up to. No, I don't think Three Eye Atlas is a threat, but I think it's significant. And I also think it's a significant narrative for these people. And when you see Loeb involved, and you think about the Galileo project here at Harvard, you know, I'll tell you, Loeb, the first thing he did, when I heard about Galileo, I was like, this might be interesting, you know. You're going to search for UFOs and things, and you'll have all these scientific people doing it at Harvard. That's interesting. And instead, the first people he signed up were Mellon and Lue, because Mellon, with the DoD billionaire connections, he controls the whole thing. So I knew instantly that's where it's going. And just to tell you how freakish my reality can be around here in Harvard, I saw, you know, Elizondo and Loeb and these people walking around, and even in my cafe. Okay, so. And one of the things they were doing was installing the UAP telescope on top of his lab. You know, trust me, I have no desire to deal with those people at all, but, you know, they're around. And so go ahead, make my day.
I do want to mention this, okay, because someone else asked about this earlier. Casey said there would be a flash of light in the sky on October 29th, 2025. Coincidentally, that's the Three Eye Atlas perihelion. I know that's a lie because this is AI generated.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Okay. So here's what happens. On YouTube, they have channels that will show Casey's face and show false predictions, and then have an AI voice read false predictions. It has nothing to do with Edgar Casey. I think the ARE should pull him down, frankly. And those, you know, predictions are totally false, and they've been putting false voices on his stuff. If they just had the readings up there, I'd be delighted. Right? The readings are some of the greatest gifts to humanity that you can get. And thank God we have the ARE in Virginia Beach that digitized and safeguarded all of his amazing work. It's such an incredible foundation for a new world that we're all invited to build there through Casey's work. But no, that trust me, I know the readings. Perfect. I know the readings so well that if there was anything like that, I would have told you a long time ago.
Right, it's like those videos that say, "Oh, these, you know, celebrities that died today." Like, they're still living.
What?
We've all seen those things.
Who has the lack of conscience to do that? Yeah, I see it all the time.
People do anything for a buck.
All right, I'm going to read. Let's see, it's my last quote. An unusual victim of X-Protect in all of this. A very famous actress, incredible woman, Marilyn Monroe. There's pretty good evidence that she was a victim of X-Protect. And this document came out, and it surfaced as an intelligence document. There's no question about its authenticity. You can question its meanings or whatever. But anyway, it's she's being bugged by the FBI and the CIA. And this is a very small book, short book by Donald Burleson. And inside of the body of the document, okay, I'll just read a little bit. Near the top of the page, the report number are redacted. So it's identified as a wiretap of a telephone conversation between reporter Dorothy Kilgallen, of course, and her close friend, Howard Rothberg. From wiretap of telephone conversation of Mal Monroe and Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Rothberg discussed the apparent comeback of Mal Monroe with Kilgallen and the breakup with the Kennedys. Rothberg told Kilgallen that she was attending Hollywood parties hosted by the inner circle among Hollywood's elite and was becoming the talk of the town again. Rothberg indicated in so many words that she had secrets to tell. This is Marilyn. No doubt arising from her trysts with the president and the attorney general. One such secret mentions the visit by the president at a secret airbase for the purpose of inspecting things from outer space. Now, Kilgallen replied that she knew what might be the source of the visit. In the mid-50s, Kilgallen learned the secret effort by the U.S. and the UK governments to identify the origins, of a crashed spacecraft and dead bodies. Kilgallen believed that's the Roswell incident, by the way, and she was way ahead on that. Kilgallen may have come from New Mexico. Her story may have come from the New Mexico story in the late 40s. That's Roswell. Kilgallen said that if the story is true, it would cause a terrible embarrassment for Jack and his plans to have NASA put men on the moon. Isn't that interesting? Subject repeatedly called the Attorney General, okay, subject here is Mal Monroe, and complained about the way she was being ignored by the president and his brother. Subject threatened to hold a press conference and would tell all. Subject made reference to bases in Cuba and knew of the president's plan to kill Castro. Subject made reference to her diary of secrets in which the newspapers would do with such disclosures. Now, that's the end of the thing. But the diary of secrets, all these things are being picked up by wiretap, and she's having conversations. So she gets out of hand in that sense. And then she starts saying, oh, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reveal the fact that he has visited these alien bases and that, where we keep alien material and things, and that he has talked to me about these UFO bases. I'm going to talk about that because space is all the rage here. And this is going to be her way to kind of bring back the attention. So the kind of echoes of terror through the various intelligence agencies upon hearing that this very incredibly high profile actress is going to do this. They don't care if she's going to reveal anything about the Kennedys. They probably enjoy that, frankly, but they don't want anything about the UFO file revealed. So very shortly after that incident, of course, she is eliminated under very unusual circumstances. And she does not, commit suicide. She is rubbed out. And it takes Dr. Noguchi to tell us at the time how it happened. And there were a couple of brave people there who weren't in on the cover-up. So, but what you see there is the X-Protect group works. It works in all of these different environments. It works in technological environments. Like with McCandlish, his drawings, he had seen too much. Eskridge's story sounds remarkably similar. The thing about Marilyn, she's a second-hand witness to hearing this, but the information is too explosive. So this is what we need to understand about the role of X-Protect. By the way, they don't always go around assassinating people. Sometimes they just destroy their reputations or destroy their careers. It depends on the nature of the situation. But I think in the case of Marilyn, it's particularly interesting because there's the interface there, and I'll call this interface Marilyn, Judith Exner, Frank Sinatra and John F. Kennedy. There's some nexus there about advanced technology because Exner was feeding these blueprints back to President Kennedy that were coming from defense contractors through mobsters. Okay. Mobsters in space, everybody. And what was happening was the secrets behind the advanced technology for the secret space program. Kennedy wanted that back channel, getting that information. He wanted to know what they knew and what they were keeping from him. And that's how he was using this actress, Exner. But, Kennedy was known to open up about deep things with Marilyn Monroe. So I think what you're looking at is somebody who is right in the center target of a group like X-Protect. So you see how they invade our everyday reality at times. And I think that if anything, one thing that we do know about X-Protect is it's connected directly to the intelligence community, but it's in that shadow corridor. So if anything, we need to keep that edge of the intel piece out, and those players around it. And their currency are threats. That's something that's normal to them in their function, but it has no place in a serious study of something as important to the human community as the UFO file. And there's a lot of information that brings us to that conclusion. And with that, Miss Olivia, I'm going to turn it over to your super chats, please.
Okay, let me line them up. All right, David Donaway, Rich Hall, Karen Carpenter, Amarillo Gunrunners, Erica Swenson Elliott, Jay Parsons, Eurythmy is Fun, Lydia Peterson, Black Tie, CB, Sick of the BS, Empire of Light, Ray Story, Tim Houston, Opium Face, Heather Sansone, W. Ross, and Natalia Christine Escudero. Thank you so much for your generous super chats.
Wow, excellent. We really appreciate it. One thing I forgot to show was, this is very strange. Remember, we started the show with the big back and forth with Elon and NASA. Look at this weird story. Just from a couple days ago. Former NASA nominee Jared Isaacman in talks to become the agency's chief. This was the guy that caused the falling out between Trump and Musk in the first place, because Trump would not install Elon's pick, this Democrat, to head up NASA. He didn't have the qualifications anyway. Suddenly, now he's back on the radar, baby. Hey, baby, I'm back to head NASA. And with that, everyone, it's been a great show to be here with you. I'm going to do a couple of shout outs before we go. And I left a lot on the cutting room floor here. So you're going to look for follow up of this episode, maybe when that documentary comes out. How does that sound?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's pretty good. All right. What do we got here? Joe Gallo. Edgar Casey, it possibly helped cloak them to convince others they were psychic too. Interesting. Ah, yes. Tim Houston. Love you, DJ and Olivia. Thank you, Tim. What time is it in Australia? And I know it has many time zones. New Jersey mobster, homes, and clones. Dee Dee, you got it right. You got it right, baby. Are we sure Marilyn wasn't affiliated with some faction of agency? No, the files are so thick on Marilyn on the FBI side. They thought she was a communist because of Arthur Miller, who she was married to for a short time. Incredible story. Marilyn's life is, these people, what I found interesting was there's a Ringo Starr recounting how Elvis wanted to get rid of the Beatles or something. And he said, well, we knew Elvis was in close with the CIA. I was like, what? Maybe we can get Ringo on to talk about that, because that's kind of a mind melter right there. Thank you, Miss Olivia. You're as meaningful as always, says Cece. Right on. Najat, it's great to see you. Good night, X-Fam, says Najat. Supposedly there's something now where I can show the comments as this rolling thing, but I'll figure that out at some point, I promise. Scarlet Fire, Michael Riccio, and Heather's out there. Thank you, DJ and Olivia. The ideas from Stay Salubrious. Yeah, I will go and check the dictionary immediately when we're done to figure out what you just said. It's great to see you. Jessica Rodriguez, great show tonight. Thank you. It's great to be back. Like I said, I love doing interviews. We have exciting interviews coming up for you. But boy, it's always great to be here with you live and mixing it up with the ideas from. There's nothing quite like it. I can tell you that. And I learn as much, and I think that you guys know that. So many whistleblowers silenced. Yeah, I just touched on them barely tonight. It's dramatic. It's dramatic. And, they speak for all of us when they're trying to bring these things forward. So, and there's so many, the word whistleblower, when we have this thing going on, means something else to those CIA groups. That those aren't whistleblowers. They're dancing Chris Mellon guys. Was Marilyn Monroe killed because she wanted alien disclosure? Wow. Well, I'll tell you this.
Kind of.
Yeah, it's not. It's I think that she wanted to bring forward what she learned from the president. Now that she was in his rear view mirror there, and she wanted some way of coming back and saying, well, he told me about this. And she could have got encouragement from Kilgallen, because Kilgallen wanted information like that out. So, whoa, very deep indeed. But, Marilyn was a very deep student of the Steiner work. So she knew a lot.
Can I bring something up?
Yeah.
Okay. So Ray Story has told me that there is a UFO in Niagara, which I was unaware of.
Interesting.
And there's a scene, I guess, I only saw this movie years ago. And,
interesting. It's a great movie. I remember that one.
A helicopter scene, and there's a UFO in there for anybody who wants to check it out.
Wow. Okay. Well, we'll have to figure that one out. That sounds great. What if I told you there was a gangster movie that had mystery school disclosure in it? I won't tell you which one it is in this episode, but I will bring it forward, I promise. And it is, let me tell you, full on gangster disclosure. Let's see what we got here. Dawn Uwe, I want to be abducted by Marilyn Monroe when I was 13. That's great. Marilyn, like Elvis, these people, they're so powerful that they go on, and their influence goes on and on. Olivia has contagious laugh. There you go. Esther Taylor, I look forward to Fridays. We look forward to being here with you. Thank you for joining us. Let's see. I didn't know that about Marilyn. Yeah, pretty wild, Natalia, isn't it? Just off the charts. And there's more. There's more. Let's see here. Harmony Woods. So is Atlas Comet spaceship thing Bluebeam? Right. Yeah, Avi Loeb is like Mr. Bluebeam guy. He is the AI Bluebeam guy, though. His object has to be, from a scientific point of view at Harvard, how can we question it? But I question his 10 years in Talpiot. I'll tell you what's interesting is he's been with us so long, with such a young genius, that he was over here working on Star Wars in the mid-1980s. Well, that's about 40 years ago. So, this guy has been deep in the system for a long time. Let's see. Yes. What does it say? Can you give Olivia the link? Okay, good. Yeah. What did they say on the moon? What did they see on the moon, DJ? I think they saw very definite indications of an off-world civilization. That is, I think they were buzzed repeatedly by craft. Now, the whole thing about ruins on the moon has always been rumored. There's a guy who came through one of those Greer disclosure hearings who was absolutely legitimate, whose job it was to remove those things out of the photographs. So that's part of the problem. There's no doubt about it.
Right. What did Ingo Swann say?
Oh, forget it. Ingo, he had to do an incredible double-blind remote viewing thing, and then suddenly he didn't even recognize the group that was taking him there. It was these blonde twins who were like, super Aryan dudes. And then he gets there, they blindfold him, they give him the mission, and he's like, I'm not even working for the US government anymore. Who are these guys? And the mission was to telepathically observe the civilization on the moon. And Ingo, you know, I mean, was a remarkable remote viewer. Did not, you know, he was not somebody who was going to lie about these things.
Do you remember what kind of aliens he saw?
He
What
saw
species?
he saw humans, and he saw towers that were so large compared to them, like gigantic towers. And he said all of the ETs he observed were a human, all the people that were up there. Now, here's what's interesting about him is he said in real life he encountered in a supermarket an alien, and that he knew it was an alien because of their telepathic ability. That's the dead giveaway with them. And he had to basically, because he had the same type of ability, not let them on to the fact that he knew what they knew. So quite a charmed life Ingo led, but that's a very strange story indeed. And I don't doubt it. I just do not doubt it. After my conversations, you know, with these various researchers, you know, you have to keep the mind very open if you're going to learn the truth about this. Tina Boric is out there. Loved Ingo Swan. Yes, Ingo, he brought a lot to the table. Of course, David Jacobs, he's the one, you know, who really brought things over the top in terms of hybrids and things. And you know, he related to me this protocol about capturing those memories, but he's the best person for dealing with that recovery of memories of alien abduction. And he's the kind of the person who put it on the map, and he's still with us. Thank God. What a great, you know, body of knowledge there with David Jacobs. Phenomenal. They are everywhere. I like that. We're going to close with that one.
Mhm.
And what a fantastic group we had out there. A Mermaid Moxie's out there too. I know Kate's out there. It's great to see you. We will see you all next week. And we have some very exciting shows coming up for you. Of course, that's a Halloween show, so watch out.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Get ready. I have a surprise for you. And we also have some exciting interviews coming up for you. News, a major docuseries special in November for the Kennedy anniversary. Amazing things coming up, and it's all there. Remember, it's in the newsletter. We will see you all next week. And of course, it says end broadcast, Miss Olivia, but
Never really ends.
never really ends. And never let it be forgot that once there was a Camelot, and there can be again. We'll see you all next week. Until then, sleep tight.
God
We'll
bless
see you all very, very soon.